In front of the fortress, 2 guards in dark blue iron armor were guarding the gate. Flags with the word blue on them were planted high in the fortress, fluttering in the wind. "Who are you?" The 2 guards crossed their long poles and blocked Jian Wushuang's way. One of them asked expressionlessly, "Blood Sword, I'm here to visit the pass guard." Jian Wushuang cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Blood Sword." The 2 guards narrowed their eyes. Jian Wushuang's reputation was quite well known recently, so the 2 dark blue armored guards naturally knew him. "All right, Lord Bloodsword, please wait a moment. I'll go see Lord Blue now." The 2 guards cupped their hands at Jian Wushuang and then walked into the fortress. A moment later, the armored guard walked out of the fortress and bowed. "Lord Bloodsword, Lord Blue has invited you in." "Many thanks." Jian Wushuang nodded at him and immediately strode into the fortress. As soon as he entered the fortress, a huge spiral stone ladder appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. "Come on up." Then Jian Wushuang heard a faint voice. The voice was so clear that it was hard to tell if it was male or female. "All right," he said. Jian Wushuang nodded and replied. The owner of the voice must be Lord Blue, one of the 9 overlords on the ancient road of stars. Jian Wushuang was quite curious about this Lord Blue. He wanted to see what level the so-called big shot level of battle strength on the ancient road of stars had reached. Jian Wushuang walked up the stone stairs while thinking. A moment later, a red wooden door appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. Bang! The next moment, the wooden door automatically opened. A slender figure in blue, sitting cross-legged on the ground, appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. Her face was covered with a veil, and only her beautiful eyes were exposed. "Lord Blue," Jian Wushuang shouted tentatively. "Blood Sword, come in and sit." Lord Blue pointed at the futon opposite him. Jian Wushuang nodded and strode into the room. He sat cross-legged in front of Lord Blue. "Lord Blue, I've come to visit this time for the sake of clearing the document." Lord Blue hummed an acknowledgement and replied, "Blood Sword, you can just call me Blue, but I can't give you the official document." Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. Lord Blue glanced at Jian Wushuang, paused, and continued, "Blood Sword, the density of the laws in the first 10 cities and the last 8 cities are completely different. Can be said that they are 2 completely different worlds. If you want to pass the official document, that is not something that I can decide. That Lord has already set the rules. You have to clear the first 3 levels of the God Refining Tower before you can obtain the official document and enter the last 8 cities." As he spoke, Lord Blue stretched out his hand and pointed upwards. "Is that the Lord's intention?" Jian Wushuang thought for a moment and then replied in a deep voice, "Blue, then he'll have to trouble you to bring me to the God Refining Tower. It's a small matter, not a big deal." Blue nodded and then led Jian Wushuang out of the fortress. Outside the fortress, Ruler Hao Jin saw Jian Wushuang coming out and asked hurriedly, "Lord Bloodsword, did you get the clearance document?" "Not yet, wait for me here." Jian Wushuang replied and then followed Blue toward a huge black tower in the 10th city. "Lord Blue, we pay our respects to Lord Blue." On the way, the ultimate rulers of the 10th city all greeted Blue respectfully. Blue nodded slightly in response. It could be seen that Blue had a high prestige in the 10th city. A moment later, the 2 of them arrived in front of the huge black tower. This black tower had a total of 9 floors, and was shaped like a L character. The higher it went, the sharper it became. On the body of the tower, there were 2 words, God Refining, carved with sharp edges. "Blood Sword, this is the God Refining Tower. The higher you go, the more difficult it will be. On the ancient path of stars, no one has reached the top of the 9th level. The highest record is the one with the undying tyrant body, who reached the 7th level." Blue introduced, "If you want to get the clearance voucher for the Blood Sword, you only need to pass the first 3 levels. Do you understand my explanation?" "Understood." Jian Wushuang nodded and no longer hesitated. After taking a deep breath, he strode toward the God Refining Tower. "Blood Sword, let me remind you not to force yourself in this God Refining Tower. Try to reach as many levels as you can and don't make things difficult for yourself. Over the years, quite a few ultimate rulers have died in the God-refining tower. Finally, let me remind you that while it is dangerous inside the God-refining tower, it is also a good fortune. Blue looked at Jian Wushuang's back and said meaningfully. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang stopped in his tracks and fell into deep thought. Many thanks. Jian Wushuang thanked him, and in the next moment, he walked into the God-refining tower. The first level of the God-refining tower was a huge black space. It was surrounded by darkness. Roar! The roars of beasts came from the void. Then, many monsters with sharp horns on their heads and 4 legs on the ground walked out of the void. Their eyes were bloodshot as they bared their teeth at Jian Wushuang, with stinky saliva dripping from the corners of their mouths. Yuan siphoning beast? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. He was familiar with the monster. He had seen many of them when he had left the divine beginning realm and traveled the universe. The soul-devouring beasts were also known as the universe's scavengers. Wherever a ruler died in the universe, they would appear. They lived by absorbing the divine power and aura of a ruler that had yet to dissipate after their death. In terms of individual strength, these Yuan siphoning beasts were not even comparable to ordinary first-stage rulers. However, when they grouped together, even ordinary ultimate rulers would have to retreat. Every 100,000 years, there would be news of Yuan siphoning beasts killing ruler-level cultivators. They were notorious. Roar! Accompanied by a series of roars, countless energy-devouring beasts surged out of the void and filled the space. They stared at Jian Wushuang with their hind legs rubbing against the ground, as if they were impatient to tear Jian Wushuang apart. Bang! Finally, when the first soul-devouring beast leaped and bit at Jian Wushuang, countless soul-devouring beasts also moved. Clay chickens and pottery dogs. Jian Wushuang's eyes glinted coldly, and the Wuxia divine sword appeared in his right hand. Then, he slashed out a sword light, and instantly, hundreds of soul-devouring beasts were crushed into powder. In an instant, a feast of killing began, like a flower blooming at dawn. Pung pung pung! Jian Wushuang swept the Wuxia divine sword in his hand, and sharp sword essence kept exploding. Every sword intent that exploded killed no less than 100 Yuan siphoning beasts. Huge pits were blasted open in the dense horde of Yuan siphoning beasts. However, after these beasts died, more emerged from the darkness and charged at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang was expressionless. To him, no matter how many of the soul-devouring beasts came, they would not pose any threat to him. With the Wuxia divine sword in his hand, killing these soul-devouring beasts was as easy as chopping melons and vegetables. I would like to see how many energy-devouring beasts there are in this God-refining tower. Jian Wushuang sat down with his legs crossed and closed his eyes. He used his divine power to control the Wuxia divine sword, and it swept through the first level of the God-refining tower. The Wuxia divine sword slithered around Jian Wushuang like a spiritual snake. The cold sword light slashed down continuously, taking the life of the soul-devouring beast. The massacre was so intense that the sky turned dark. No less than 100,000 Yuan devouring beasts had died at Jian Wushuang's hands. In the God-refining tower, it was as though there was no concept of time. After an unknown amount of time, the number of Yuan devouring beasts on the first level started to decrease. Whoosh! With a flash of blood-red sword light, the Wuxia divine sword killed the last soul-devouring beast. Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes and stood up. Come! Jian Wushuang stretched out his hand and clenched his fist. The Wuxia divine sword appeared in his hand, and the first level of the God-refining tower was filled with sword qi. In the next moment, the sword qi was completely absorbed by the God-refining tower. What's going on? Jian Wushuang frowned, but before he could think further, the scene changed again. He was still surrounded by the dark void, but Jian Wushuang could feel that the place had become different. The space here was more stable, and there were traces of rich nomological aura in the void. Although this principle's energy could not be compared to the river of enlightenment, it was several times more than the outside world. Tap 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 tap. A sound came from the void again, but this sound was different from the roar of the Yuan siphoning beast. It was as if someone was walking in an orderly manner in the dark. The first level has the yuan siphoning beasts. What's the second level? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and looked at the void curiously. He did not have to wait long. A weirdo covered in bandages, holding a rotten broken sword, and only his eyes could be seen, suddenly condensed in the void. A 2-3. In just a few seconds, tens of thousands of bandaged swordsmen had gathered in the void. These bandaged swordsmen were wrapped in old and yellow bandages. Even their heads were wrapped in layers of bandages, only revealing a pair of lifeless and numb eyes. The rotten broken swords in their hands drooped under their bodies like walking corpses. They staggered toward Jian Wushuang. Oh? A swordsman without consciousness? This is interesting. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and tried to slash at the bandaged swordsman. Clang! A loud muffled sound was heard. The bandaged swordsman, who had been cut by Jian Wushuang, numbly raised the rotten broken sword in his hand to block. However, the difference between Jian Wushuang and the bandaged swordsman was too great. The bandaged swordsman was cut into pieces in less than a breath's time. The sword light that Jian Wushuang casually slashed out directly cut a 1,000-foot-long blood path in the group of bandaged swordsmen before it stopped and disappeared. Jian Wushuang swung his sword a few more times and found that there was no difference from before. He shook his head in disappointment. This bandaged swordsman is too weak. He's only slightly stronger than the energy-devouring beast. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang no longer had the mood to observe. He released the Wuxia divine sword and let it kill the bandaged swordsman. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of swords clashing rang out as the bandaged swordsmen raised the decayed broken swords in their hands to block. However, before they could really block, the Wuxia divine sword was like a killing machine, quickly piercing through them. The powerful and sharp sword intent directly blew up these already rotten swordsmen into dust. It did not take long before the bandaged swordsmen were all killed by Wuxia divine sword. Jian Wushuang opened his right hand and the Wuxia divine sword shot back into his hand. It was absorbed again? Jian Wushuang frowned. He could feel that the remaining sword essence on the Wuxia divine sword was absorbed by the surrounding void again. What's going on? Or perhaps, what is this God-refining tower trying to do? Jian Wushuang was lost in thought. From the first level of sword chi to the second level of sword essence, Jian Wushuang had an illusion that the sword chi and sword essence he was absorbing would affect their training in the God-refining area. A moment later, the scene in front of Jian Wushuang changed again. He knew that he had reached the third level. As long as he passed the third level, he would be able to obtain the clearance voucher to enter the 8 cities. At the same time, in the 10th city, buzz, buzz, 2 loud bell chimes suddenly sounded in the sky above the 10th city. The sound of the bell was filled with an ancient and vast feeling, giving people a feeling that it came from ancient times. When they heard the 2 bells, all the ultimate rulers in the 10th city raised their heads in unison. Someone is challenging the God-refining tower. The 2 bell chimes mean that the person who challenged the tower has already passed 2 levels and reached the 3rd level. They were all discussing. However, there was no change in their expressions. After saying those words, they lowered their heads again. In the 10th city, they had seen many people who had passed through the 2 levels of the God-refining tower. Thus, there was nothing to be surprised about. Only a small number of people had a look of interest in their eyes as they headed toward the God-refining tower. Outside the God-refining tower, Blue did not leave. Instead, he crossed his arms and raised his head to look at the God-refining tower. Buzz, buzz. 2 bell chimes came from the God-refining tower. Blue exclaimed when he saw this and said, "The 2 bell chimes came out almost at the same time. It seems that Bloodsword's speed in breaking through the tower is very fast." At some point in time, ruler Hao Jin had also arrived outside the God-refining tower. When he heard Blue's mumbling, a hint of pride appeared on his face. He puffed out his chest and chuckled. "Lord Blue, our Lord Bloodsword is the one who personally killed Heavenly Snake Playboy. It is naturally not a problem for him to pass the first 3 levels of the God-refining tower." Blue looked at him indifferently and did not reply. Instead, he continued to mutter to himself, I remember that heavenly snake playboy seemed to have reached the 5th level and was unable to go any further. I wonder how many levels this blood sword can reach. After Blue finished speaking, he continued to look up at the God-refining tower with a pensive look in his eyes. Kachuk. In the 2nd level of the God-refining tower, the surrounding void was constantly being shattered. Immediately after, the field of vision in front of Jian Wushuang changed. The intense light made him close his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he was already in a huge arena. The arena was still surrounded by endless darkness. There's almost no time interval between the 1st and 2nd levels. However, I can clearly feel the time interval between the 2nd and 3rd levels getting longer. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered as he pondered. He could vaguely sense that there seemed to be some laws that could be followed within the God-refining tower. Jian Wushuang raised his head and looked around. He saw a huge stone sculpture standing in the center of the ring. The stone statue was tall and sturdy, with a bare upper body, and it held a huge white sword in its hand. Most importantly, this stone statue didn't have a head. What kind of monster is it this time? Jian Wushuang was not in a hurry to attack. Instead, he looked at the stone sculpture with interest. Kachuk. Suddenly, the entire 3rd level of the God-refining tower started to shake violently. The stone statue of the headless swordsman also began to shake, and pieces of soil began to fall off. Bang! Finally, there was a loud explosion, and all the rocks on the headless swordsman's body were blown away. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's face was filled with interest again. The soul-devouring beasts on the 1st level had no thoughts and only knew how to kill. The 2nd level's bandaged swordsmen were like puppets. Although they still had no thoughts, they knew how to use weapons and even counterattack. The headless swordsman in front of him could even have a short conversation. Unparalleled power. I am the law enforcer of the Great Ring Star Field, the fallen commander of the Cross-Sword Army. But you, are you here to challenge my authority? The headless swordsman repeated in a low voice when he saw that Jian Wushuang did not respond. You only know how to repeat these 3 sentences? Jian Wushuang frowned and casually slashed out a sword light. Whoosh! The headless swordsman let out an angry roar and raised the door-sized white sword in his hand to block. Clang! A loud sound of metal clashing rang out. The headless swordsman took 3 steps back. The Wuxia divine sword struck the white sword and a long string of sparks appeared. Oh! He blocked it. This time, Jian Wushuang was a little moved. One should know that even though he had just casually slashed out, it was enough to kill an ordinary ultimate ruler. The energy-devouring beast from the 1st layer and the bandaged swordsman from the 2nd layer could not withstand this attack. You are offending the dignity of the army commander of the Crusader army. The headless swordsman growled and stomped his feet on the ground before he shot into the sky. Go to hell. This is the punishment for offending the regimental commander. The headless swordsman roared in anger. He grabbed the hilt of the white sword with both hands and slashed at Jian Wushuang. Wisps of white smoke began to rise from the sword. Then, it was the embodiment of the laws of the universe being integrated into sword techniques. Interesting. Jian Wushuang twitched the corner of his mouth. He was not in a hurry to use his great superpower to kill the headless swordsman. Similarly, Jian Wushuang wielded the Wuxia divine sword. Waves of dense universe principles were integrated into the sword technique. Then, he performed the simplest basic sword technique and attacked the headless swordsman. Boom! 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 In an instant, the two exchanged hundreds of moves. Although this headless swordsman knows how to use the laws of the universe, it's only the simplest use of the laws of the universe. There's nothing worth redeeming about it. Jian Wushuang shook his head and did not waste any more time. In a flash, he appeared behind the headless swordsman and slashed down with the Wuxia divine sword. The sharp sword essence completely killed the headless swordsman. The headless swordsman crumbled into dust in an instant. Jian Wushuang frowned again. He felt that this time, not only his sword essence and divine power were absorbed by the surrounding void, but even a few traces of his universe law were also absorbed by the surrounding void after killing the headless swordsman. Zzz. In the void, it was suddenly pulled open and a huge door appeared. Through this door, one could see the world outside the God-refining tower. At the same time, a token with the words, Starry Sky, appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. Now that he had passed the third level of the God-refining tower, the Starry Sky token should be the pass document to enter the last 8 cities. As for the Void Gate, it should lead to the outside of the God-refining tower. Jian Wushuang flipped his right hand and the universal token flew into his hand. Jian Wushuang hesitated. He did not choose to leave, but sat down cross-legged. He had a faint feeling that there might be an opportunity waiting for him in the God-refining tower. Jian Wushuang slowly closed his eyes. Outside the God-refining tower, the third bell rang. You've also passed the third level. Blue's entire face was covered by a veil, only revealing a pair of beautiful eyes, which flashed with a touch of surprise. When the third bell rang out, many ultimate rulers gathered in the 10th city. Lord Blue. We pay our respects to Lord Blue. These final realm cultivators first greeted Blue before raising their heads to look at the God-refining tower. They started discussing, who cleared the third level of the God-refining tower? I heard that it's the Blood Sword who just entered the 10th city. Blood Sword? That's not surprising. He was able to kill Heavenly Snake Playboy, so the first 3 levels of the God-refining tower naturally can't pose any threat to him. I just don't know if the Blood Sword will choose to continue after passing through the 3rd city, or if it will give up and enter the last 8 cities with the pass document. It's hard to say. The higher we go in the God-refining tower, the more difficult it will be. It's very likely that we will fail at the last step. I wonder what kind of trial the Blood Sword will encounter in the God Refinement Tower. After all, the contents of the trial simulated in the God Refinement Tower will be different for everyone according to their cultivation technique, secret technique, laws, and so on. Let's continue watching. After the group of ultimate rulers discussed for a while, they stopped talking. Instead, their eyes flickered as they looked up at the God Refining Tower. Within the God Refining Tower, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes and the scene changed. The 4th level. They had arrived. A wandering swordsman with thick black hair tied back and a sword at his waist was standing on the 4th floor. I am the Gale swordsman who is wandering in the universe. Are you here to ask me for advice on the sword principle of Gale? The wandering swordsman looked at Jian Wushuang and said indifferently, Another expert in the way of the sword? Jian Wushuang's eyes lit up. Apart from the soul-devouring beast on the 1st floor, the bandaged swordsman on the 2nd floor, the headless swordsman on the 3rd floor, and the man who called himself Gale Swordsman were all swordsmen. Within the God Refining Tower, it was strange. Are you here to ask me for advice on the Gale Sword principle? The Gale Swordsman looked at Jian Wushuang again and said, just as Jian Wushuang thought that this Gale Swordsman was like the headless swordsman on the previous floor, who could only repeat those few lines, the Gale Swordsman spoke. If you're not here to learn the sword principle of Gale, please don't disturb my sleep. If you're here to learn the sword principle of Gale, now is the time. Hold your sword tightly and be ready to die at any time. Jian Wushuang could not help but raise his eyebrows slowly. This is really interesting. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself with a strange expression. Then, he took a step forward and charged at the Gale Swordsman. But you're too noisy. Bang! A sword light suddenly slashed out from the Wuxia divine sword and slashed at the Gale Swordsman. Your speed is too slow in front of me. The Gale Swordsman looked at Jian Wushuang's sword and immediately stepped forward to avoid the sword light. At the same time, he quickly stabbed at Jian Wushuang with the 9 Heavens dark steel sword in his hand. I will let you know the true essence of the sword principle of Gale. The sword was extremely fast. Jian Wushuang felt that the Gale swordsman in front of him seemed to know the form displacement technique. With just one step, he swept in front of him, leaving an afterimage in the void. Your speed is not bad. Jian Wushuang gasped in admiration. He pulled up the Wuxia divine sword in his right hand and blocked the fierce stab. Clang! Suddenly, a loud sound of metal clashing was heard. The 9 Heavens dark steel sword in the Gale swordsman's hand stabbed into the Wuxia divine sword, and a long string of sparks appeared. Jian Wushuang flicked his right hand and forced the Gale Swordsman to retreat. The Gale Swordsman was sent flying backward. Then he stomped on the ground with his right foot again and charged toward Jian Wushuang. Listen up. The true essence of the sword principle of Gale is the speed of killing people without them noticing. Bang! Suddenly, a whirlwind appeared under the Gale Swordsman's feet. The Gale Swordsman stepped on the ground with his right foot, and his speed increased again. Feel the power of the wind. Secret skill, 9 Gale Slashes. Boom! In an instant, countless divine power gathered on the 9 heavens dark steel sword in the Gale Swordsman's hand. Sword chi shot out like wind blades, densely packed and uncountable. In the end, the sword chi interwove together and formed 9 sword tornadoes that pierced through heaven and earth. The moment these 9 sword tornadoes appeared, the entire 4th level of the God Refining Tower let out an earth-shaking sound. The Gale Swordsman pointed his divine sword at Jian Wushuang and said indifferently, "This is my Gale Sword Dao." Bang! Suddenly, the 9 sword blades flew toward Jian Wushuang. Good! Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with battle intent and he was really interested. Split open the sky. Whoosh! In an instant, a vast and vigorous divine power condensed on the Wuxia divine sword. The Wuxia divine sword immediately let out a cry of a god, a demon, and a low chant of a Buddha. A ray of sky-opening sword energy slashed out and slashed at the 9 sword blades. Boom! A loud sound was heard. The heaven-opening sword light was poignant to the extreme. It crushed over directly and broke the 9 tornadoes with destructive power. Then, it locked onto the Gale Swordsman again and slashed at him fiercely. In the face of this sword strike that could split the heavens and earth, the Gale Swordsman's long hair that was tied behind his head was blown up. His expression was calm as he said, "Congratulations on completing the challenge. My mission is complete. Enjoy my Gale Sword principle." Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, the sky-opening sword light struck the Gale Swordsman's body. A powerful and sharp sword intent burst out, directly crushing the Gale Swordsman into powder. However, the ending this time was somewhat different from before. At the place where the Gale Swordsman had disappeared, a black line appeared and then shot toward Jian Wushuang's forehead. In the next moment, the black lines entered between Jian Wushuang's eyebrows. Jian Wushuang suddenly felt that his comprehension of the sword principle of Gale emerged in his mind. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. He sat down with his legs crossed and carefully comprehended the sword principle of Gale that appeared in his mind. After a while, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes and looked down at his palm. A small whirlwind of sword chi condensed in his palm. Is this what Blue meant by danger, but also opportunity? Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. Although the sword principle of Gale was not of much use to him, it could help him comprehend the origin of sword principle. Whether it was the sword principle of Gale or other sword principles, they all belonged to the power of the origin of sword principle. Jian Wushuang's comprehension of the third origin of sword principle had reached a bottleneck. These sword principles were perfect for Jian Wushuang to absorb and use to break through to the third stage of sword principle origin. As expected, some of the power of splitting open the sky has also been absorbed by the surrounding void. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes, but he was too lazy to think about the reason. He waited quietly for the arrival of the 5th level. Outside the God Refining Tower, as the 4th bell rang, almost everyone in the 10th city, including the ultimate rulers who were not in seclusion, had a change in expression. They all came to the God Refining Tower. The 4th floor is cleared. We're about to reach the 5th level. The blood sword is so fast. From the 3rd level onwards, every level in the God Refining Tower will be harder to pass. However, correspondingly, the opportunities that one can obtain will also be greater. The trials that begin after the 3rd level are impossible to deal with unless one is the best among the ultimate rulers. It seems that the combat power of this blood sword is not exaggerated. It really has the power to kill Heavenly Snake Playboy. I just don't know if Jian Wushuang can pass the 5th level. The 5th level is a barrier. The ultimate rulers all said in low voices. As for Lord Blue, he was looking at the God Refining Tower without saying a word. Not long after, Wang, the fifth bell rang. After the bell rang, it exploded in the sky above the 10th city and reverberated back and forth. Everyone present was shocked once again. This time, no one in the entire 10th city could remain calm. They all went outside the God Refining Tower to take a look to see who had the ability to pass 5 levels of the Divine Tower in a single day. He's also passed the 5th level. I remember that Heavenly Snake Playboy only made it to the 5th level. The 5th level. Even among the elite cultivators in the last 8 cities, only a small number of them have passed. I heard that the Blood Sword is only a 5th stage ruler. It's truly impressive that it could reach this stage. If the Blood Sword can break through to become an ultimate ruler, the last 8 cities will no longer be 9 overlords, but 10. I just don't know how far the Blood Sword can go. As hurried discussions broke out, Ruler Hao Jin raised his head, a hint of pride on his face. The current him felt a greater sense of achievement when he heard others praise the Blood Sword than when he heard them praise himself. On the 6th level of the God Refining Tower, Jian Wushuang's expression was grave and he was panting slightly. He did not look relaxed at all. The trial on the 5th level of the God Refining Tower was for a sword saint expert who had comprehended the tyrant's sword path from ancient times. His strength was extremely powerful. Even for him, he had to go through a fierce battle before he could kill him with extreme difficulty with the Sundering Stars sword. Of course, after killing the ancient sword saint, Jian Wushuang also gained a lot. He gained all the comprehension of the ancient sword saint's sword principle. Jian Wushuang could feel that his comprehension of the 3rd level of the origin of sword essence was like a bucket that was not filled with water. As he absorbed the comprehension of the sword principle of Gale Swordsman and the ancient sword saint, it gradually became complete and spotless. He only needed to absorb the origin comprehension of a sword expert's sword Dao, and he would be able to break through the 3rd level of the sword Dao origin in the universe and reach the 4th level. At that time, his offensive power and swordsmanship divine arts would have a tremendous change again. As he was thinking, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes and looked around. This was the 6th floor. The 6th level was a chaotic void. The law energy here was comparable to the Dao Comprehension River. In the void and chaos, there was only a huge painting hanging. In the huge painting, there was a figure wearing silver armor and holding a long sword. He looked like a guardian knight and a divine general of the ancient heavenly court. The figure's face was covered in silver armor, and his appearance could not be seen clearly. Only a pair of tightly shut eyes were exposed. His figure was straight and he was filled with a dignified and inviolable aura. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with a touch of coldness. With just a glance, he could feel the threat that the silver-armored figure gave him. The next moment, "Mortal, do you want to challenge God's might?" A voice like rolling thunder came from the giant painting. Then, the divine general in silver armor in the portrait suddenly opened his eyes. 2 extremely sharp beams of light burst out from his eyes. Jian Wushuang did not reply. Instead, he took a deep breath and raised the Wuxia divine sword in his hand. This sword could not be avoided. Kachuk. Then, a crack appeared in the middle of the portrait. The divine general in silver armor grabbed the crack with both hands and walked out. An earth-shaking pressure suddenly descended on the entire area. Under this pressure, the entire chaotic world seemed to tremble. "Mortal, I am the first divine general under God Emperor Daolis from 300 chaos cycles ago. Fei Hong. Countless ultimate rulers have died by my hands. Are you ready to pay with your life to challenge my dignity?" The flying swan divine sword was expressionless. It looked at Jian Wushuang with an oppressive gaze. "You talk too much." Jian Wushuang snorted coldly and immediately controlled the Wuxia divine sword, turning into a sword light that charged at divine general Fei Hong. "My sword Dao is only for killing. Feel the power of God." When divine general Fei Hong saw this, he suddenly drew the divine sword in his hand. A bloody aura instantly emanated from the divine sword in his hand. "Split open the sky." Jian Wushuang's black hair flew in the wind as he shouted coldly. The heaven-opening sword light in his hand slashed down at divine general Fei Hong. A puny power. Divine General Fei Hong shook his head nonchalantly as he casually swung his sword at the heaven-opening sword ray. This sword was just a casual strike, but it was filled with a sense of oppression and slaughter. It was as if there was an invisible force that wanted to drag people into a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Bang! With a loud explosion, the ever-victorious heaven-opening sword ray was split apart by a casual swing of Divine General Fei Hong's hand. He's very strong. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. With just a single exchange, he could feel that Divine General Fei Hong's fighting power was definitely at the fighting power of an unrivaled ruler. He was much stronger than anyone he had met in the God-refining tower. The laws of the universe, the power of will. At that moment, Jian Wushuang did not hesitate anymore. He immediately used the 10 times power of will that the universe had given him, and the divine power in his body increased by 10 times. After doing all this, Jian Wushuang shouted in a low voice, "Sundering stars!" The 1,000-foot sword rainbow instantly condensed. Jian Wushuang held the 1,000-foot sword rainbow in his hand and slashed down at the flying swan divine sword like a peerless sword god. This sword was enough to destroy a star. Oh? This sword strike is indeed remarkable. Divine General Fei Hong raised an eyebrow as a look of surprise flashed through his eyes. Then he shook his head and said, "However, that's all there is to it." With that, Divine General Fei Hong's divine sword was covered in blood as it slashed down at the sword rainbow. The slaughter sword Dao is indomitable. It's the invincible sword Dao. A blood dragon rushed out of the divine sword in Divine General Fei Hong's hand, roaring and howling. It opened its mouth and bit the sword rainbow. A burst of extremely overbearing sword essence immediately shot out from the blood dragon, trying to suppress the sword rainbow. Ka-ka-ka. Ka-ka-ka. In an instant, the blood dragon and the 1,000-foot sword rainbow clashed. The two sword intents kept clashing and intertwining, making a muffled sound that shattered the void. It seems that Divine General Fei Hong's comprehension of Sword Dao origin has also reached stage 3 top class. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and thoughts flashed through his mind. If Jian Wushuang could defeat the Flying Swan Divine Sword and obtain his comprehension of the origin of Sword Principle, he was confident that even if he could not break through to the 4th level of the origin of Sword Principle immediately, it would be a matter of time. All of a sudden, Divine General Fei Hong, who had been extremely difficult to deal with, had become a hot commodity in Jian Wushuang's eyes to improve his comprehension of Sword Principle. At that moment, a decisive look flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. His divine power, which was more than 13,000 times stronger, burst out, and the universe law was also integrated into his swordsmanship. Without any hesitation, he attacked the Flying Swan Divine Sword. Innate divine power. Original universe. At the same time, Jian Wushuang activated the original universe, which could greatly reduce the opponent's power. The entire 6th level of the God Refining Tower was filled with suppression of Divine General Fei Hong. "Oh, mortal, I have to admit that you do have the qualifications to challenge me." Divine General Fei Hong's eyes narrowed and he no longer held back. His majestic and overbearing divine power and unfathomable laws of the universe burst forth. His aura started to surge. "Mortal, feel the power of God." Boom! A sword Dao battle that transcended space and time had begun. Bang! 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 In the void and chaos of the 6th level, Divine General Fei Hong and Jian Wushuang turned into two shocking sword radiances, one silver and one black. They flew around and collided with each other continuously. The silver-winged divine sword in Divine General Fei Hong's hand and the Wuxia divine sword in Jian Wushuang's hand exchanged thousands of blows in a short period of time. The vast and vigorous divine power exploded in the void. Split open the sky. Sundering stars. Jian Wushuang swiped his right hand, and the Wuxia divine sword in his hand trembled thousands of times in an instant. The two moves of sky opening and star slashing were executed from the Wuxia divine sword one after another and blasted toward Divine General Fei Hong. Divine might! God's wrath! The Flying Swan divine sword also shouted coldly. The divine light in the eyes that were only exposed under the silver mask suddenly increased by 3 inches. A pair of silver wings appeared behind him, and the silver-winged sword in his hand was instantly covered in a thick blood-red color. A destructive power shot out from the sword in his hand, carrying a terrifying aura. Slash! At once, Divine General Fei Hong leaped high into the air. The silver-winged divine sword in his hand turned into a monstrous blood dragon that slashed down at Jian Wushuang. Pung pung pung! The two of them retreated at the same time, their god bodies shaking. Jian Wushuang lowered his head and looked at his right hand. The area between his thumb and forefinger felt numb. In the next moment, he raised his head and looked at Divine General Fei Hong with a grave look in his eyes. This was the only person who did not lose to him in Sword Dao after he came to the depths of the universe. Mortal, I have to admit that you have the ability to compete with gods. If you were in my era, you would be a true god of Sword Dao that wasn't weaker than me. Divine General Fei Hong said indifferently with a solemn expression. You're noisy. Jian Wushuang was expressionless, and then he took a deep breath. Innate divine ability. Life intimidation. Boom! An intimidating power from the deepest part of the soul suddenly descended on the scene. Under this power, it was as if time had fallen into a swamp and all living things had to submit to it. They knelt in front of Jian Wushuang and bowed their heads. This, Divine General Fei Hong's expression changed instantly. Just as he was about to flare up, he felt as if millions of mountains were pressing down on him. He could not move at all and could not help but want to kneel down in front of Jian Wushuang. You dare to make a god submit to you? He spat out these words with difficulty. Jian Wushuang did not answer. Instead, his eyes flashed and he immediately charged at Divine General Fei Hong. Whoosh! Without any hindrance, Jian Wushuang's Wuxia divine sword directly stabbed into Divine General Fei Hong's chest. Then, a sharp sword essence burst out. Mortal, enjoy my slaughter sword Dao. Divine General Fei Hong looked at Jian Wushuang deeply before his divine body crumbled, and he was ground into dust by the sharp sword essence. Black lines appeared where the flying swan divine sword had disappeared and shot toward the space between Jian Wushuang's eyebrows. Jian Wushuang did not resist. He sat down cross-legged and slowly closed his eyes. A loud voice resounded in Jian Wushuang's mind. I, Divine General Fei Hong. The divine sword in my hand was born for slaughter. Boom! In an instant, a large amount of Divine General Fei Hong's comprehension of sword principle, mixed with his memories, was poured into Jian Wushuang's mind. The world in front of Jian Wushuang started to change. It was as if he had traveled through space and time to 500 chaos cycles ago. Jian Wushuang saw a young man of 7 or 8 years old with delicate features. He was holding a wooden sword and dancing around at the foot of a hill. This was the young Divine General Fei Hong. Memory inheritance? Jian Wushuang muttered to himself and then slowly closed his eyes, immersing himself in the memories that belonged to Fei Hong. The sun was high in the sky, and the young man's sweat was pouring down like rain. His white clothes were completely drenched in sweat. However, he did not give up. His eyes were filled with determination. He gritted his teeth and kept waving the wooden sword in his hand. Again and again, the overlapping sword shadows intertwined with each other, accompanied by the heavy breathing of the youth and the chirping of cicadas in the summer. I, Fei Hong, will definitely become the most powerful swordsman in the world. The sun gradually set, and under the afterglow of the setting sun, a young man's childish and ambitious words could be heard. Xiao Fei, it's almost time to come back and eat. Your father specially bought a big black carp from the town. At the bottom of the hill, smoke rose in spirals as a peasant woman carried a hoe and wiped the sweat off her forehead. Mother, I'm coming. Fei Hong quickly hid the wooden sword in his hand, grabbed the black yak, and ran down the hill. This year, Fei Hong was 8 years old. Time passed quickly. This year, Fei Hong was 19 years old. That year, the only sect in the nearby town, the Green Mountain Sword Sect, was recruiting disciples. Fei Hong refused his parents' wish to send him to the capital to take the imperial examination. He asked blacksmith Wang in the village to forge a rough and ugly iron sword for him, and then sneaked out of the village and came to the gate of the Green Mountain Sword Sect. He was mixed in with a group of young people who had also come to learn from him, and he was a little nervous. It was said that the people living on the Green Mountain Sword Sect were all legendary immortals, who could ride their flying swords and ride the wind for thousands of miles. They were very powerful. As for him, he was just a cowherd boy from a farmer's village. He had only learned a few sword moves in a daze and was really not worthy of being on the stage. After a long wait, it was finally the Fei Hong test's turn. He gathered his courage and slowly walked up under the serious gaze of the old man in charge of the assessment. Sword Soul Awakening, the body of the sword spirit. However, the whole Green Mountain sect was shocked when the results of the examination were announced. Fei Hong, who had been a cowherd boy in a farmer's house, had become the most dazzling new star in the entire Green Mountain sect. There was no other. He had joined the Green Mountain sect as a disciple of the most powerful Grand Elder, and countless resources had been poured into him. Time passed by, and time was merciless. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter kept on moving. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. The young and nervous cowherd boy had become the big brother of the Green Mountain sect, and the most dazzling star in the entire Green Mountain sect. At the moment, Fei Hong was 29 years old. He was high-spirited, confident, and handsome. Many pretty young girls of the Green Mountain sect had fallen head over heels for him. Just as he was immersed in the harmonious and peaceful life of the sect, a change suddenly occurred. Once, when he was out on a sect mission, he had offended the young sect master of the strongest sect in this region, the Purgatory Sword Sect. He had been killed in anger. In an instant, a great disaster was imminent. The Green Mountain sect, where he had been a disciple, had been wiped out. The kind and gentle elders of the sect, as well as the lively and playful junior sisters and brothers, had all died in front of him. He could only watch helplessly as this happened, unable to put up any resistance. For the first time, he realized how weak he was. He realized that he was just an insignificant ant in this world. At last, with the help of the sect master of the Green Mountain sect, Fei Hong managed to escape and was sent out of the Green Mountain sect. The blow this time made Fei Hong feel disheartened. He was like a stray dog, wandering around aimlessly. All of a sudden, he wanted to go home and see his old parents, whom he had not seen in 10 years. However, when he returned home, the scene in front of him made him break down. Blood flowed like a river, and corpses covered the land. All the people in the small village had been slaughtered by the people from the Purgatory Sword Sect. His parents' bodies were left on the side of the road, almost eaten by the wild dogs in the mountains, and they emitted a pungent smell. At this moment, Fei Hong's tense mind finally broke. He could not hold it in anymore and burst into tears. He kneeled in front of his parents' bodies, dug a hole with both hands, and shakily buried his parents' bodies in it, one layer of yellow soil after another. On this day it rained heavily. In the midst of the lightning and thunder, Fei Hong knelt in front of the grave, his hair turning white overnight. He knelt in front of his parents' grave for 3 days and 3 nights. The high-spirited eldest brother disappeared and turned into a wild man with red eyes, dry lips, and messy white hair. This time he raised the sword in his hand. Just like when he was a teenager, he practiced his swordsmanship at the foot of the hill. The divine sword in his hand danced wildly in the rainy night. The electric fan roared and thunder rumbled. On this day, Fei Hong comprehended the slaughter sword Tao. In the end, Fei Hong kowtowed 3 times in front of his parents' grave and left with his sword. Time passed and 100 years had passed. In the past 100 years, Fei Hong had tested his sword all over the world, challenging all kinds of sword experts. He had traveled all over the mountains and rivers, and his sword cultivation was improving rapidly. Whether it was the well-known sword experts or the new sword geniuses, they all died under Fei Hong's sword. Not a single person survived Fei Hong's attack. Finally, one day, Fei Hong ascended 3 realms in a row and became one of the top experts in the small world. He understood that it was time for revenge. Fei Hong, raise your sword and observe the ceremony of the Purgatory Sword Sect. On this day, Fei Hong stepped on the divine sword, and the sword chi swept across 30,000 miles, turning into a peerless sword rainbow that pierced through the sun and the moon. He flew to the sky above the Purgatory Sword sect and said calmly, "On this day, the light of the sword shone across all 19 continents. In this small world, countless people raised their heads and looked up at this unparalleled sword immortal who could slash the galaxy. Kill!" Countless sword experts rushed out of the Purgatory Sword sect. The massacre had begun. In this battle, the sun and moon lost their light, the land sank, and the entire sky was replaced by blood. No words could be used to describe the intensity of this battle. Fei Hong's expression was indifferent. The divine sword in his hand ruthlessly reaped lives one after another. In the Purgatory Sword sect, no one could escape Fei Hong's slaughter, be it an old man who was at the end of his life or a young man who had just joined the sect. Anguished wails, pleas for mercy, and cries rang out continuously in the Purgatory Sword sect. However, no one could move Fei Hong's frozen heart. The flowers that were watered with blood bloomed with their beauty. On this day, it rained blood in the Purgatory Sword sect. That day, the entire Purgatory Sword sect was slaughtered. On this day, the Purgatory Sword sect would no longer exist in the world. With all the knots in Fei Hong's heart removed, the slaughter sword doctrine had reached its completion. When he left the Purgatory Sword sect, the mountains of corpses and seas of blood became his background. Suddenly, Fei Hong was confused. In this world, he had no family, no friends, and even his enemies had disappeared. He suddenly did not know where he should go. He lowered his head to look at the blood-stained sword in his hand, and he understood. In the past, as time passed, the only thing he could rely on was the sword in his hand. He, Fei Hong, would live for the sword Dao and only for killing. In the remaining years, Jian Wushuang watched Fei Hong start his invincible years. He watched as Fei Hong fought back in every battle, turning the tides and stepping into the peak of the myriad world. He watched as Fei Hong became famous, suppressed the 9 heavens and 10 lands, grew up in slaughter, comprehended the slaughter sword principle, and broke through to the 3rd level of sword principle. He watched as Fei Hong stepped into the final ruler realm and became an unrivaled ruler of the world, opening up an era that belonged to him. He saw how Emperor God Wu Dao conferred Fei Hong as the first divine general and bestowed him with the divine sword Silver Wing. That day, the entire universe was shaken by it. The name of the first godly general of Fei Hong City spread across the starry sky. He was invincible. The memories that belonged to divine General Fei Hong gradually faded away. Jian Wushuang's last image stopped at the moment when the Great Tribulation descended and divine sword Fei Hong fell. Jian Wushuang had seen his ups and downs, from the cowherd boy in the farmer's village to the high-spirited big brother of the Green Mountain sect to the famous divine General Fei Hong in the universe. He had seen his ups and downs, from dejection to pride, and even his death. In a short time, Jian Wushuang had read all about the legendary life of the Fei Hong divine sword. In the next moment, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes. 2 rays of light flashed across Jian Wushuang's eyes. As divine General Fei Hong's memories faded, Jian Wushuang felt that his comprehension of the 3rd level of sword principle origin, which had been stuck, had suddenly changed. The bucket that had been lacking a spoonful of water was finally filled with the slaughter sword doctrine. Jian Wushuang could clearly feel that he was only 1 step away from the 4th level of sword principle origin. As long as he meditated quietly, he would be able to break through to the 4th level of the origin of sword principle. In the 6th level of the God Refining Tower, a whirlpool suddenly appeared in the originally empty and chaotic sky. Jian Wushuang knew that he would reach the 7th level of the God Refining Tower once he entered the whirlpool. The 7th level was the highest record that countless geniuses had ever reached since the ancient path of stars was opened. Jian Wushuang stood up and looked up at the huge whirlpool in the sky with a determined look in his eyes. The legend of divine General Fei Hong had come to an end, but the legend that belonged to Jian Wushuang had just begun. Bang! Jian Wushuang stomped his right foot heavily and his body shot out, disappearing into the whirlpool. At the same time, outside the God Refining Tower, buzz! The melodious sound of a bell turned into rings of sound waves that rippled across the 10th city. At that moment, the entire 10th city was in shock. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the God-refining tower. Their eyes were filled with extreme shock and disbelief. The 7th floor. The blood sword has reached the 7th city. Since the Overlord reached the 7th level 8,000 years ago, no one has ever reached the 7th level. Blood sword will become the second person to reach the top of the God-refining tower's 7th level after the Overlord. Set a new record. Starting from the 7th level, every step of the blood sword will create a new record. Countless people gasped for breath and gasped in admiration. Even Lord Blue, one of the 9 magnates, was shocked. The entire city was shocked. At that moment, all the people in the 10th city had gathered outside the God-refining tower. They were a black mass as they stared at the God-refining tower. Legendary. They were about to witness the rise of a legend. Ruler Hao Jin was so excited that all the fat on his body trembled. He felt as though following the blood sword was the best decision he had ever made in his life. He would be a witness to the legend. Time slowly passed. Jian Wushuang's speed of breaking through the God-refining tower had become slower than ever. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. However, no one was impatient. They were all waiting to see if Jian Wushuang could create a legend. I remember the last time the Overlord was on the 7th floor. He stayed there for 100 years, but he still didn't succeed. The God-refining tower's record up until now is the Overlord and the blood sword reaching the 7th level. I wonder if the blood sword can break the record. What do you guys think is inside the 7th floor? When the Overlord came out of the 7th floor, he didn't talk about it at all. Let's wait for the blood sword to appear. Perhaps it will give us an answer. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Jian Wushuang had been stuck on the 7th floor for 10 years. Just when everyone thought that Jian Wushuang would stay on the 7th level for 100 years like the Overlord, a bell-like sound suddenly exploded in the sky above the 10th city. Boom! The sound of the bell seemed to have traveled through the primeval universe. It carried an ancient aura and exploded in the minds of everyone in the 10th city. This was the first time the bell from the 7th level of the God-refining tower had rung since the ancient path of stars was opened. It was as if it was announcing that the blood sword had become a new history for the God-refining tower, and that the world was congratulating it. The 7th floor. You've passed. The history of the ancient path of stars will begin to be rewritten. Everyone in the 10th city was dumbfounded. Ruler Hao Jin could not help but let out a loud cry of excitement. From now on, the blood sword will replace the Overlord and become the keeper of the new record in the God-refining tower. He will set a new benchmark for those who come to the God-refining tower in the future. The blood sword will start a new chapter in history. Countless people stared at him and said with certainty. Lord Blue's eyes narrowed, her beautiful eyes shining with a strange light. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking. Soon after, the 8th level of the God-refining tower began. Time flew by and 60 years passed. The 8th bell rang again. This time, the tolling of the bell from the 8th city could be heard throughout all 18 cities on the ancient path of stars. In the back 8 cities of the starry sky, countless top geniuses raised their heads in unison, squinting at the gray sky with a touch of solemnity in their eyes. They knew that soon, there would be a newcomer who was strong enough to be on par with them and break into the back 8 cities. At that time, perhaps the situation of the 9 giants dominating the last 8 cities would be broken. And outside the God-refining tower, it had already turned into a dead silence. The thousands of people were all silent. In the 10th city, all the sounds disappeared, leaving only a strange dead silence. They looked at the God-refining tower in a daze. Their mouths were so wide open that an egg could be stuffed in. They had a dazed expression. The next moment, the 10th city was in an uproar. The 8th floor. God Refinement Realm Level 9. The blood sword has already broken through to the 8th level, and will soon reach the peak of the 9-level Divine Tower. Rumor has it that in the 9th level of the God Refining Tower, there is a gift that was personally prepared by that Lord. TSK. But this is a gift personally prepared by that Lord. I can't imagine how precious it is. Countless people shouted. Blood sword. Number 1 in the God-refining tower. There were even people who shouted out such words in their excitement. However, his words were immediately corrected. Let's not talk about Lord Blue for now. The current Blood Sword is not only the number 1 person in the God-refining tower, he is also the number 1 person in the top 10 cities. At that moment, everyone submitted to Jian Wushuang. Even Lord Blue shook his head and muttered to himself after his eyes lit up. Heavenly Snake died in his hands. It's not an unjust death. Just as everyone was looking forward to Jian Wushuang reaching the top of the God-refining tower, the door of the God-refining tower opened at this moment. Jian Wushuang walked out of the God-refining tower with his black hair scattered. His steps stopped at the 8th floor. Did I fail the 9th level? It seems so. The ultimate rulers of the 10th city looked at each other. However, it's already very powerful for the Blood Sword to reach the 8th level. That's right. Don't forget that the Blood Sword is only a 5th stage great ruler. In the next moment, they looked at Jian Wushuang with respect. Ruler Hao Jin ran over hurriedly and hugged Jian Wushuang. He was so excited that he could not even speak properly. Lord Blood Sword, you're too strong. It's a blessing from my previous life that I, Hao Jin, can follow you. You're being too serious. Jian Wushuang replied with a smile. After saying that, Jian Wushuang turned to Lord Blue. He flipped his right hand and a token with the words Starry Sky appeared in his hand. He smiled and said, Blue, is this the clearance text? Lord Blue nodded and replied, That's right. This is the entry scroll. You can enter the last 8 cities now. Thank you. Jian Wushuang cupped his hands and replied, No need to thank me. You got this with your own strength. Lord Blue waved his hand and replied without a care. Jian Wushuang did not say anything else. He looked at ruler Hao Jin and said, Hao Jin, I'll go to the last 8 cities first. After you get the clearance voucher, you can enter the last 8 cities and find me. The last 8 cities were different from the top 10 cities. In the top 10 cities, as long as one was strong enough, Jian Wushuang could bring him to any level. However, in the last 8 cities, one had to enter the God-refining tower and obtain the pass document. All right, Lord Blood Sword. I'll be back soon. Ruler Hao Jin puffed out his chest. For the first time, he felt boundless motivation surging through his body. Then, I hope we can meet again. Jian Wushuang smiled at him, then strode toward the entrance of the 10th city. Just as he was about to enter the passage, some rulers of the 10th city asked, Sir Blood Sword, may I ask what kind of trial is on the 7th floor? Jian Wushuang stopped, thought for a while, and then replied indifferently, It's my own Tao. When everyone heard this, they could not help but be stunned. His own Tao. Before they could ask any more questions, a white light gushed out and Jian Wushuang disappeared at the entrance of the 10th city. After a while, the white light gradually dissipated. Lord Blue looked at the entrance of the 10th city, where Jian Wushuang had disappeared, and a meaningful look flashed in his eyes. At the entrance of the ancient path of stars, a huge universe boat shot over from the distance. On this universe boat, there was a flag with the words Great Void written on it. It fluttered like a sail, making a loud sound as it suppressed the starry sky. Then, the cabin door of Universe Boat opened, and a monster with a hunched waist and a back full of thorns walked out of Universe Boat. This is the Universe Boat of the Great Void Divine Palace? Is this the person sent by the Great Void Divine Palace to the ancient path of stars path? It doesn't look like much. This time, the Great Void Divine Palace will probably be fine in the battle for the 8 cities after the ancient path of stars. Some of the ultimate rulers who spent most of their time at the entrance of the ancient path of stars and loved to comment on the various major powers laughed and discussed. However, before they could finish their words, their vision suddenly turned black, and then they felt a sharp pain. Bang! In the next moment they stopped moving. It's too noisy. Qiu Long shook his head and rushed over. With just one palm, he sent the right hand of the group of ultimate rulers flying back. At the entrance of the ancient path of stars, the many ultimate rulers saw this, and their eyes narrowed in fear. He had killed the group of ultimate rulers without saying a word. What sort of person was this? Qiu Long chuckled and took a step forward, his body instantly disappearing. In the next moment, he appeared in front of the group of ultimate rulers. What do you want to do? The hearts of the Omega rulers trembled. Don't be nervous. Qiu Long squeezed out a smile that he thought was kind and friendly. He put his hand on the shoulder of one of the ultimate rulers and asked, I'm not going to eat you. Why are you so nervous? I just want to ask you a question. The heart of the ultimate ruler with Qiu Long's arm around his shoulder could not help but tremble. But he forced himself to remain calm and said, What do you want to ask? Qiu Long smiled and flipped his right hand. A dark light mirror appeared in his hand. He raised the dark light mirror and asked, Have you seen this person before? What is this? The Omega ruler was startled. He stared at the black-robed, black-haired figure in the mirror, then said hesitantly, I think I've seen this person before. Oh? When did you see it? Qiu Long raised his eyebrows. The final ruler nodded upon hearing this. He thought for a moment, then replied, If my memory serves me right, this person came to the ancient path of stars 100 years ago. At that time, he even killed the 2 guards who were in charge of guarding the ancient path. Where did he go now? Qiu Long continued to ask. The ultimate ruler shrugged his shoulders and replied, Do you even need to ask? It's naturally within the ancient path of stars path. Okay, I got it. Thank you so much. Qiu Long replied with a smile. When the ultimate ruler heard this, he could not help but completely relax. It seemed that this person was not that hard to talk to. No need to thank me. The ultimate ruler waved his hand and said in a carefree manner, No, I have to thank you. Therefore, I have decided to give you a gift. Qiu Long lowered his head, and the corner of his mouth gradually curved into a strange arc. A present? What gift? The eyes of the ultimate ruler lit up, and he instantly grew interested. For you, go to hell. Boom! Qiu Long suddenly raised his head and a sinister smile appeared on his face. He suddenly reached out with his right hand and grabbed the head of the ultimate ruler, lifting him up. Do you like this gift? Qiu Long grinned hideously with a deep voice, his eyes flashing with an extremely fierce light. No, don't. The ultimate ruler was utterly terrified. However, before he could finish his words, his head had exploded like a watermelon. Bang! The final ruler was instantly reduced to dust. Qiu Long retracted his hand and looked at the several ultimate rulers who had been scared out of their wits. He patted their shoulders and squeezed out a smile that he thought was kind. He chuckled and said, Why are you so nervous? I'm just passing by. After saying that, Qiu Long strode toward the entrance of the ancient path of stars. A few breaths later, he disappeared into the entrance. Seeing his back disappear, the many ultimate rulers finally let out a long sigh of relief. The 11th city on the ancient path of stars was also the first Dao city of the 8 cities that followed. After traveling through the darkness for a long time, Jian Wushuang's field of vision gradually brightened. An extremely desolate world with a dark sky appeared in front of him. This place, the last 8 cities? Jian Wushuang looked around and saw that he had appeared on a square platform that was suspended in the air. Around the square platform, there were more than 10 divine guards holding divine spears. These divine guards were all dressed in different clothes, and they did not seem to be from the same force. When they saw Jian Wushuang walking out of the passage, they immediately swarmed up. Your Excellency, we belong to the forces under the young emperor of the Defeng Divine Kingdom. Would you like to join us? Your Excellency, please join our blood god. Sir, we're the people of the great prince of the great divine nation. We're here to recruit talents. Would you consider joining us? Your Excellency, how should I address you? In the God Refining Tower, how many levels did you pass? These divine guards all spoke at once. Jian Wushuang could not help but frown, and a look of deep thought flashed in his eyes. He had long heard that the rules of the last 8 cities were completely different from the top 10 cities. In the last 8 cities, all the ultimate rulers, except for Lord Blue, who guarded the 10th city, respected the 8 magnates. Except for some experts who were extremely confident in their own strength, The others had to rely on the 8 magnates to survive and form various forces under them. Jian Wushuang collected his thoughts and replied indifferently, Blood Sword has only passed the 3rd level of the God Refining Tower. As it was his first time in the last 8 cities, Jian Wushuang knew nothing about the rules there. He decided to join one of the forces temporarily to understand the situation. In order to avoid being too high-profile and attracting attention, Jian Wushuang merely announced that he had cleared the first 3 levels of the God Refining Tower. After all, the first 10 cities rarely communicated with the last 8 cities. By the time his detailed news reached the last 8 cities, it would be a long time later. He only cleared the 3rd level of the God Refining Tower? Immediately, a hint of disappointment flashed in the eyes of the people in charge of recruitment from the various forces, and they gradually dispersed. The expressions of the remaining forces were no longer as warm. You're Sir Bloodsword, right? We are the rulers of the Great Conqueror. Would you consider joining our camp? What's the matter? A muscular and bearded ultimate ruler asked. Jian Wushuang thought for a moment and nodded. Sure. All right, Sir Bloodsword. Then come with us. Ha ha. The bearded ultimate ruler laughed heartily. Jian Wushuang followed the bearded ultimate ruler and walked toward a pavilion in the distance. Along the way, Jian Wushuang had learned that the bearded ultimate ruler, Ruler Mountain Shaker, was as powerful as an unrivaled ruler. He was a well-known heaven's favorite in the universe. However, geniuses were everywhere in the latter 8 cities. Ruler Mountain Shaker's strength was inferior to the others, so he joined the Overlord and became one of the 6 leaders. Brother Bloodsword, since you've become the Overlord's subordinate, we're brothers now. I'm sure you don't know much about the back 8 cities, so I'll explain it to you, Ruler Mountain Shaker said with a laugh. Then I'll have to trouble you, Commander Mountain Shaker. Jian Wushuang nodded. All right. First of all, the last 8 cities are different from the first 10 cities. The last 8 cities are connected to each other, and as long as you have a pass scroll in your hand, you can go to any city without any restrictions. In other words, you can view the latter 8 cities as a small world, while the 8 cities are the 8 great continents. In the last 8 cities, almost everyone will join a force because the fighting in the last 8 cities is extremely fierce. One can die if they are not careful. If they only rely on fighting alone, it is almost impossible to gain a foothold in the last 8 cities. Commander Mountain Shaker said slowly. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and asked, Commander Mountain Shaker, why are you talking about this battle? The commander smiled and continued, Bloodsword. The battles in the last 8 cities have been going on for a long time. For one thing, we've been living under the same sky, so there will always be some friction, which makes fighting inevitable. For another thing, the most important reason is the fight for the investiture of the gods. The God Sealing Tablet? Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with doubt. It was the first time he had heard of this name. Yes, the God Sealing Tablet is the most important thing in the 8 cities. In the last 8 cities, there are a total of 99 God Sealing Tablets, which represent the qualification to participate in the Great Clan Gathering. Only with the God Sealing Tablet can we, rulers, enter the universe's Great Clan Gathering 90,000 years later, said Commander Mountain Shaker in a deep voice. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang immediately understood. Almost all the rulers who had come to the ancient Path of Stars had come for the Great Clan Gathering, so it was easy to imagine how fierce the competition for the God Sealing Tablet would be. The two of them talked as they walked, and soon they arrived at the pavilion in the distance. Not long after he entered the building, a divine armor guard suddenly ran over. Commander Mountain Shaker, the investiture of the gods has been found in the 12 cities. The Overlord has invited you over. He has something to discuss with you. Commander Mountain Shaker's face darkened. He turned to Jian Wushuang and said, Bloodsword, please wait for a moment. I'll go see the Overlord first and help you get the godly armor and identity token. Wait for me here. With that, Commander Mountain Shaker hurried off with the divine armor guard. It's fine. Commander Mountain Shaker, you can go ahead with your work. Jian Wushuang nodded. After the Commander Mountain Shaker left, the pavilion immediately became quiet. Jian Wushuang sat down with his legs crossed and his eyes flickered. He finally understood a little about the situation in the last 8 cities. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, a month had passed. Jian Wushuang did not waste any time and started to break through to the 4th level of Sword Principle Origin. He slowly closed his eyes and began to immerse himself in the comprehension of Sword Principle. Back in the Tarot ruins, he had swallowed the 9-leaf swordgrass and broken through to the 3rd level, Origin of the Sword. Then, with the help of the remaining Chaos Sword intent from the 9-leaf swordgrass, he pushed the 3rd level of Sword Principle Origin all the way to the peak. After that, his comprehension of the origin of Sword Principle stopped and he was stuck at a bottleneck. This continued until he entered the God Refining Tower. Sword Principle of Gale appear. Jian Wushuang opened his hands and a small whirlwind gradually formed in his palm. The sharp sword qi shattered the void in all directions. This was the Sword Principle of Gale. Then, a Sword Saint Phantom from the ancient times appeared behind Jian Wushuang. This was the 5th level of the Overlord's sword path. Then Jian Wushuang's eyes turned red. The scene in front of Jian Wushuang suddenly changed to the scene of Divine General Fei Hong massacring the Purgatory Sword Sect. There were mountains of corpses and seas of blood. This was the 6th level of the Slaughter Sword Dao. The 3 great sword principles gushed out. Close! Jian Wushuang shouted in a low voice. In an instant, the 3 sword principles from the God Refining Tower slowly merged together and turned into Jian Wushuang's own sword principles. At this point, Jian Wushuang's shortcomings in breaking through the 4th level of sword principle had been made up. However, this was not the end. And the 7th level, my own sword Dao, Jian Wushuang said slowly. In an instant, memories regarding the 7th level of the God Refining Tower came flooding in like a tidal wave. On the 7th level, he was facing himself. On the 7th level, Jian Wushuang finally understood why some of his power would be absorbed by the void around the God Refining Tower in the previous levels. That was because the God Refining Tower would simulate a person that was exactly like him. However, it was a pity that the Jian Wushuang simulated by the God Refining Tower lacked the most fundamental thing. That was the constitution of a perfect life form. In that battle, Jian Wushuang had clearly seen his own strengths and weaknesses in Sword Principle. In the end, he had used the power of his divine body to kill his simulacrum. Boom! Jian Wushuang's body let out a muffled sound. The stagnant comprehension of the 3rd level of the Sword Principle began to break through. 3 days later, clang! A shocking sword essence exploded with Jian Wushuang as the center. This sword essence was extremely sharp, as if it wanted to cut the firmament into pieces and split the chaos. It directly shot up into the sky. 4th level, complete. Jian Wushuang opened his eyes and 2 divine lights flashed past like lightning in the dark night. The next moment, the sword essence that shot up into the sky was all retracted. Jian Wushuang stood up. After breaking through to the 4th level of Sword Principle Origin, his aura became sharper and sharper. It was as if he was a peerless weapon, exuding a sharp and fierce power. Jian Wushuang waved his hand and immediately covered his aura, as if there was no difference from before. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard outside the pavilion. Blood Sword, the bearded ruler Mountain Shaker strode over. He handed a black armor to Jian Wushuang and said, "Blood Sword, this is the godly armor of the Conqueror's camp. It's enough to block the ultimate ruler's full power attack. Put it on and come with me to the 13th city to fight for the God-sealing tablet." "All right," he said. Jian Wushuang did not hesitate. He turned his right hand and put on the black divine armor. "Blood Sword, from now on, you will be the divine armor guards of the 6th Legion under the Overlord's command. Let's not delay any further and head to the 13 cities." Ruler Mountain Shaker growled. After saying this, Ruler Mountain Shaker waved his hand and barked, "6th Army, come quickly." The voice was like a thunderclap. Instantly, dozens of figures shot over from all directions. "We pay our respects to the commander." These figures cupped their hands and said in a deep voice, "The 63rd investiture of the gods has appeared in the 13th city. The great conqueror has ordered that we must take the investiture of the gods. Commander Mountain Shaker's eyes were filled with disdain as he spoke in a deep voice. Yes, sir. The several dozen divine armor guards responded. Seeing this, Commander Mountain Shaker nodded in satisfaction and continued. The other magnates won't let go of the investiture of the gods this time. The battle will be intense, so you must be prepared. The several dozen god armor guards nodded. They had all come this far, so they naturally understood that opportunity and danger coexisted. All right, let's go now. Commander Mountain Shaker took a step forward and turned into a stream of light. He took the lead and shot into the distance. The dozens of divine armor guards also rose into the sky and followed Commander Mountain Shaker. Jian Wushuang was among the dozens of divine armor guards. He was not eye-catching and he looked around. Based on his observations, each of these divine armor guards had the battle power of a peak ultimate ruler, and they were probably the best of the best. As for Commander Mountain Shaker, he was close to the level of an invincible ruler. There are indeed many hidden dragons and crouching tigers in these 8 cities. Jian Wushuang sighed slightly. It was rare to see a top ultimate ruler in the universe. Perhaps only one top ultimate ruler would be born in a big star area after a long time. The ancient path of stars was indeed a place where all the power of universe rulers gathered. Peak ultimate rulers, who usually could do anything in the outside world, could only be ordinary divine armor guards in the back 8 cities. Newcomer, this is your first time participating in the God Sealing Tablet battle, right? Stand behind me and don't run around. Understand? As Jian Wushuang was deep in thought, a burly ultimate ruler spoke. All right, thank you. Jian Wushuang put away his thoughts and cupped his hands with a smile. The ultimate ruler nodded, then replied nonchalantly. We're all from the same camp. It's too polite to say thanks. I'm the ruler Grotto Profound. How should I address you? Blood Sword. Jian Wushuang replied. Oh, I see. Blood Sword, you look unfamiliar. You must have just arrived in the back 8 cities, right? Back then, in the 10th city's God Refining Tower, which level did you reach? Ruler Grotto Profound asked casually. I didn't go too far. I just barely passed the 3rd level. Jian Wushuang replied with a smile. The 3rd level? Ruler Grotto Profound raised his brows, then mused to himself. The 3rd level is indeed a little lacking, but fortunately you have joined our great conqueror's camp. Otherwise, if you had joined any other camp, I'm afraid you would have become cannon fodder. After a pause, Ruler Grotto Profound continued. Blood Sword. When the battle for the investiture of the gods begins, you must remember to hide behind me. Otherwise, it's very likely that you'll die. Do you understand? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang nodded his head without saying anything. He could tell that the Ruler Grotto Profound's words were not looking down on him. On the contrary, they were meant to give him advice. As the two of them spoke, they followed behind Commander Mountain Shaker and shot toward the investiture of the gods. Soon, they passed 2 cities and arrived at the 13th city. We're here. Stop. Commander Mountain Shaker walked in front and waved his hand. Everyone immediately stopped. In front of them, a huge stone tablet appeared in front of them. Around the stone tablet, people had already surrounded it. They were facing each other, looking as if they were ready to draw their swords. The great prince of the Defeng Divine Kingdom, the young emperor of the Defeng Divine Kingdom, and the saint of the 9 Stars Holy Land. 3 of the 9 magnates have come. I'm afraid there'll be a fierce battle soon. Ruler Grotto Profound's eyes narrowed. Commander Mountain Shaker, who was standing at the front, also had a solemn expression. Let's go down. Commander Mountain Shaker took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. Then he took the lead and descended from the sky. The Overlord's people are here too? Beside the stone tablet, a middle-aged man in heavy armor and holding a heavenly halberd raised his eyebrows. Beside them was a huge flag with a drawing of a blazing sun. They must be the rulers of the Defeng Divine Kingdom. Mountain Shaker, long time no see. How are your injuries? A red-robed bald man from the 9-star sacred land looked at Ruler Mountain Shaker with a faint smile. The commander of Divine Kingdom Defeng's side was a bare-chested man with braids and 2 axes. When he saw Mountain Shaker, he snorted coldly and did not speak. You're all here. How can I not come? Commander Mountain Shaker glanced at them indifferently and said, "Humph. Since everyone is here, let's cut the crap. Our defunct divine kingdom wants the god sealing tablet." The big man with braids snorted again, impatience in his eyes. "Divine Marquis Mammoth, who do you think you are? Since when is it your turn to speak?" The red-robed bald man sneered. "Hong Yi, you're looking for death. You're courting death." The man with the braids, who was known as Divine Marquis Mammoth, was enraged. He raised his axes and hacked at the bald man. "Defunct divine kingdom, kill with me." His eyes flashed with a murderous glint as a violent divine power gushed out from his axes, and he chopped down on the bald man's head. This Divine Marquis Mammoth was an almost invincible ultimate ruler. As soon as he finished speaking, the dozens of ultimate rulers behind him immediately charged at the 9-star sacred land that Hong Yi belonged to. When Hong Yi saw this, his eyes narrowed and he sneered, "Mammoth, it seems that you've really forgotten about the time when I hunted you down 20,000 years ago." With that, Hong Yi flicked his right hand, and a curved blade appeared in his hand. He dodged the attack, and then slashed out a blade light toward the giant Divine Marquis Mammoth. On the other side, the heavily armored commander of the defunct Divine Kingdom twisted his neck expressionlessly. He looked down at the ruler Mountain Shaker and coldly said, "I've long heard of Commander Mountain Shaker's reputation as the immovable Buddha. I'll take advantage of today to experience it." His right hand, which was holding the Fangtian ancient halberd, swept across, and the tip of the halberd instantly drew a cold light. After taking a deep breath, Commander Mountain Shaker only said one word, "Kill!" With that, Commander Mountain Shaker charged toward the defunct Divine Kingdom's camp like a sharp knife. "Blood Sword, it's our turn. Follow me closely," he said. "Kill!" Ruler Grotto Profound's eyes flickered, and he flipped his right hand, producing a strange-looking turtle-dove blade. He followed behind Commander Mountain Shaker and charged at the Great Sun Army. Jian Wushuang nodded. He did not use Wuxia Divine Sword and followed behind Ruler Grotto Profound calmly. A bloody battle had begun. "Kill!" For a moment, the sound of battle filled the air as spell techniques and sword glows surged up into the sky. Boom! 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 From the beginning of the battle, it had entered a state of white heat. Mountain Shaker went straight for the heavily armored commander from the defunct Divine Kingdom, who was holding a halberd. The two of them were almost invincible rulers. As they fought, they turned the area within 1,000 feet into a forbidden area, and the aftermath of their battle swept in all directions, splitting the heavens and splitting the earth. "Die!" The defunct Divine Kingdom's commander shouted coldly. The heavenly halberd in his hand instantly swept across the sky, bringing with it a heavy force as it struck down on Commander Mountain Shaker. Unmoving as a mountain, looking at the halberd light that seemed to be able to cut off the sun and moon, Commander Mountain Shaker's face sank. His entire body glowed with a faint golden light, and his feet seemed to be rooted to the ground. The cold halberd light was unable to move him at all. "Do you only know how to get beaten up?" The commander of the defunct Divine Kingdom stomped his right foot with an apathetic expression and immediately hacked at the man with his halberd. On the other side, "Die!" Ruler Grotto Profound wielded that strange-looking turtle-dove blade and charged through the defunct Divine Kingdom's camp. There were no rules to this battle. It was a head-on battle between the two ultimate rulers. Pong, 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 pong. Countless divine arts and techniques exploded. If this was the outside world, the battle between the two forces would be enough to blow up a galaxy. Even in the ancient path of stars, where there were rules and space was extremely stable, it was still like a disaster had descended. The earth trembled and countless huge pits were blasted. Jian Wushuang followed behind Ruler Grotto Profound, so he was not in any danger. From time to time, he would casually slash out a sword light to help Ruler Grotto Profound block the hidden arrows that came from all directions. "Blood Sword, it seems that you're not bad." Ruler Grotto Profound turned to look at Jian Wushuang and laughed. "It's so. Jian Wushuang smiled. At this moment, "Go to hell, you little bastards under the Overlord." A bare-chested man with a mustache, wielding a large saber, slashed down at Ruler Grotto Profound. The terrifying blade light mixed with the laws of the universe roared in the sky. Remember, the one who killed you is a subordinate of the Fourth Army of the Dafeng Divine Kingdom, Commander Baron. He is Ruler Cold Disaster. Ruler Grotto Profound's face instantly turned grave. He had noticed this person a long time ago. In the Dafeng Divine Kingdom's camp, he was an expert only below the commander. In just a short while, he had killed no less than 3 of the Overlord's ultimate rulers. Blood Sword, hide behind me. Be careful. Ruler Grotto Profound took a deep breath and tightened his grip on the dagger. He growled, Thunder Slash. Boom! The turtle-dove blade in Ruler Grotto Profound's hand immediately began to coil with lightning snakes, and balls of lightning began to condense at the tip of the blade. Slash! Die! Ruler Grotto Profound's expression was solemn as he stomped down with his right foot, sending his entire body soaring into the air as he slashed down with his saber at Ruler Cold Disaster. The 2 blade auras collided with each other. Bang! The lightning exploded and a light wave spread out from where the 2 of them fought. Retreat! Ruler Cold Disaster's body trembled, while Ruler Grotto Profound was forced back 10 some steps. Oh? You're pretty good. Ruler Cold Disaster raised an eyebrow in surprise. Ruler Grotto Profound had a solemn expression on his face. He didn't say anything, only stared at Ruler Cold Disaster. He understood that he had to hold this person back. Otherwise, once he charged into their camp, no one would be able to stop him. In group battles like this, a single expert was enough to tilt the tide of the battle. Commander Mountain Shaker and Commander Baron Creek were currently locked in a stalemate. If they could not stop Ruler Cold Disaster, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, that's all there is to it. Ruler Cold Disaster laughed coldly as he raised his saber and charged forward once more. The cold black blade light was like a sun-devouring snake, instantly turning into thousands of blades and attacking like a storm. Blood Sword, be careful. Ruler Grotto Profound gritted his teeth, turned around, and warned Jian Wushuang. Then, he braced himself and charged at Ruler Cold Disaster. Boom! 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 Bang 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 bang! The 2 of them exchanged thousands of blows in an instant. The cold saber light and the lightning on the turtlehead ring saber collided, causing the ground to rumble. One could tell that, in terms of battle power, Ruler Grotto Profound was slightly weaker than Ruler Cold. Under the saber light of Ruler Cold Disaster, he could only continuously retreat. He was only able to defend, not fight back. Fortunately, however, Ruler Grotto Profound had a deep foundation of divine power. Ruler Cold Disaster really wouldn't be able to do anything to him for a while. This was also Ruler Grotto Profound's goal. He didn't hope to kill Ruler Cold Disaster. He only wanted to stall him for a while so that Commander Mountain Shaker could decide the outcome of the battle. At that time, the outcome would be decided. Ruler Cold Disaster clearly understood this as well. His eyes flashed, and he laughed coldly. Little brat, I'll get even with you after I've killed the other trash under your overlord. After saying that, his eyes flickered as he searched for a new target. Then he fixed his eyes on Jian Wushuang. Oh? There's still a piece of trash here who's trying to fish in troubled waters. In that case, I'll start with you. Hee hee. Cold Disaster laughed and stomped his foot, turning into a black light. He flew past the panting Grotto Profound God and charged at Jian Wushuang. Blood Sword, be careful. Ruler Grotto Profound's expression changed and he shouted at Jian Wushuang behind him. The thing he was most worried about had happened. It was already extremely difficult for him to deal with Ruler Cold Disaster. How could he have the energy to save others? It's you, kid. Go to hell. Hee hee. Cold Disaster grinned hideously. The saber in his hand turned into a black python that could devour the world as he slashed down at Jian Wushuang. Ruler Grotto Profound's face instantly turned extremely ugly to behold. In the distance, Commander Mountain Shaker had also noticed this scene. Kid, if you want to survive in the back 8 cities, this is something you have to go through. You're on your own. Commander Mountain Shaker muttered to himself as he shook his head. He then once again engaged in battle with Commander Huangchuan. Jian Wushuang looked at the incoming saber light and suddenly let out a sigh. "Why do you want to kill me?" Whoosh! Jian Wushuang's right hand shook slightly, and the Wuxia divine sword appeared in his hand. Then Jian Wushuang raised his right hand and looked at the grinning ruler Cold Disaster. He calmly said, "Split open the sky." As soon as he finished speaking, there was no brilliant sword light or soaring sword intent. Die! A calm streak of sword chi shot out from Wu Qi toward ruler Cold Disaster. After breaking through to the fourth level of the origin of sword principle, Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship had suddenly returned to the state of simplicity. Ha 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 ha! This soft sword chi, is it an embroidery needle? Ha ha ha! Ruler Cold Disaster laughed disdainfully. He didn't care about Jian Wushuang's sky-splitting strike at all. Even Ruler Grotto Profound's heart sank to the bottom of the abyss upon seeing this soft sword. Ah, what a pity! He sighed in his heart, but he immediately put on a serious expression. After being in the last 8 cities for so many years, he was used to seeing people die and geniuses die. What he needed to do now was to recover his divine power immediately. He had to stop Ruler Cold Disaster later, just as everyone was lamenting that Jian Wushuang, who had just arrived at the back 8 cities, was about to die. A change happened. The heaven-opening sword chi that Jian Wushuang wielded was like a surging river, getting bigger and bigger. In the beginning, Jian Wushuang's sword chi was as thin as a hair. However, in just a few seconds, Jian Wushuang's heaven-opening sword chi swept across the world like a galaxy, piercing through the sun and the moon with endless roaring power. The surging sword chi surged in all directions and turned into an earth-shaking sun and moon sword light, which swept across the sky. The wailing of gods and demons and the low chanting of Buddhas came from the Wuxia divine sword. For a moment, the sword light attracted everyone's attention. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the sword light that cut through the sky. What? How is that possible? Ruler Cold Disaster's body trembled, and a look of shock appeared in his eyes. He then took a deep breath, and a sharp light appeared in his eyes. "It seems that I have underestimated you. Secret skill mountain break." Boom! Mysterious runes emerged from the black blade in his hand and expanded to 1,000 feet. Its power was no weaker than Jian Wushuang's as it slashed at his heaven-opening sword light. "Brat, die!" He stared at Jian Wushuang with a sharp light in his eyes. As for Jian Wushuang, he had put away the Wuxia divine sword with an indifferent expression. The outcome had been decided the moment he had drawn his sword. Boom! The heaven-splitting sword light collided with the ruler of Cold Calamity's mountain-breaking blade gate. Just as everyone thought that a world-shaking battle was about to break out between Jian Wushuang and ruler Cold Disaster, a scene that made everyone's jaws drop happened. When the powerful mountain-breaking saber radiance met the sky-opening sword radiance, it was like ice meeting hot oil. It didn't even last for a second before it began to collapse. Kachuk. The heaven-splitting sword projection crushed the mountain-splitting saber projection before finally landing on Cold Disaster's body. Bang! An earth-shattering explosion erupted, setting off white waves that filled the sky. After the white waves dispersed, there was no trace of ruler Cold Disaster. All that was left was a black saber that had been broken into 2 and was floating in the air. With one sword, Cold Disaster died. In an instant, everyone turned their heads, opened their mouths, and looked at Jian Wushuang in shock. Blood. The blood sword. Ruler Grotto Profound's entire body turned stiff and petrified. He looked at Jian Wushuang and subconsciously swallowed. That ruler Cold Disaster, who had forced him to the point where he couldn't fight back at all and whom he viewed as a major threat that could affect the entire battle, had been killed with a single sword strike? Not even a trace was left behind? I was just lucky. Jian Wushuang smiled at him. Is this a fluke? Ruler Grotto Profound was dumbfounded. Then, he shuddered and punched Jian Wushuang's chest. He laughed and said, Blood sword, you've really hidden it well, kid. Jian Wushuang laughed and did not argue back. Ruler Grotto Profound took a deep breath and turned to look at the terrified Defeng Divine Kingdom's camp. A smile appeared on his face, and he said in a clear voice, Follow me and kill. Without cold disaster, the remaining rulers from the Defeng divine kingdom were unable to withstand a single blow. Coupled with their fear of Jian Wushuang, they were immediately defeated. In just a few moments, the Defeng divine kingdom's camp was utterly defeated. The distant commanders Mountain Shaker and Grotto Profound, who were battling, also noticed this. Good boy! Commander Mountain Shaker looked at Jian Wushuang and praised him loudly. His eyes were shining. As for Ruler Baron River, his face was extremely grim. Useless trash. He snorted in a low voice, but no one knew who he was talking about. Then he took a deep breath, looked at Commander Mountain Shaker and said, Mountain Shaker, you're lucky this time. I don't want this God-sealing tablet. Then, he looked at Jian Wushuang coldly with killing intent in his eyes. Kid, you're good. I'll remember you. Don't worry. I'll come and find you. Even though he was praising her, his tone was extremely cold. The hearts of all the ultimate rulers present could not help but tremble when they heard this. Sure. You're welcome to come and find me anytime. Jian Wushuang looked at Ruler Baron River without avoiding his gaze and smiled. When the Ruler Baron River heard this, he was so enraged that he began to laugh. Good, good, good. Brat, you can be as arrogant as you want now. I hope you can still smile the next time we meet. Let's go. After saying this, Ruler Baron River flicked his sleeve and shot off into the distance with a cold look on his face, completely ignoring the fate of the other ultimate rulers who had come with him. Soon, the Ruler Baron River had turned into a black dot, disappearing into the horizon. Commander Mountain Shaker heaved a sigh of relief and then walked toward Jian Wushuang. Lord Commander. Jian Wushuang cupped his hands. Commander Mountain Shaker nodded and then looked at Jian Wushuang again with an unfamiliar gaze. After the battle of the investiture of the gods is over, you'll come with me to see the conqueror. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang thought for a moment, then nodded and replied, All right, he said. Commander Mountain Shaker smiled and looked into the distance. On the other side, the battle between Nine Stars Holy Land and Defeng Divine Kingdom had also gradually come to an end. Compared to the battle between Jian Wushuang and the Defeng Divine Kingdom, the battle between Nine Stars Holy Land and Defeng Divine Kingdom was much more intense. The giant divine marquee mammoth was almost skinned alive by the red leaves. Red strings appeared between Hong Ye's fingers, and with a single grab, he took away a large portion of the divine marquee mammoth's divine power. It was extremely cruel. Mammoth, I've said it before, this is not the place for you to be impudent. Hong Yi stood in the air and looked down at the giant divine marquee mammoth. Hong Yi! Humph! Divine marquee mammoth gasped for breath, his body in tatters and dismembered. He glared at Hong Yi, his eyes filled with extreme anger as he roared. The incapability of the weak. Hong Yi shook his head and turned into a red light as he charged toward the divine marquee mammoth. The divine marquee mammoth is about to fall. Commander Mountain Shaker squinted his eyes as he observed this scene. Then he turned to look at Jian Wushuang, Ruler Grotto Profound, and the others. He said in a deep voice, Get ready. We have to get this God-sealing tablet. Boom! 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 The battle between the giant divine marquee mammoth and Hong Yi had turned into a one-sided battle. Hong Ye's figure was like a red line as he moved around the divine marquee mammoth. Roar! 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 Die! Divine marquee mammoth roared as he swung his axes. However, Hong Ye's movement technique was too strange. After the giant divine marquee mammoth's axes hit Hong Yi, his divine body collapsed and then reformed. Brainless boar. Hong Yi laughed coldly. Red snakes coiled around his fingers, and with every swipe of his claw, he would wipe out a portion of divine power from the body of the divine marquee mammoth. No matter how much divine marquee mammoth roared, he could not do anything to the Hong Yi. After a while, the voice of the divine marquee mammoth gradually weakened. Just as Mountain Shaker had said, divine marquee mammoth was no match for Hong Yi. He did not even have the chance to escape. He was skinned alive by Hong Yi. A ruler who was close to being invincible had fallen next to the God-sealing tablet. Damn it! The Defeng Divine Kingdom's ultimate rulers were immediately terrified. Some chose to side with Hong Yi, while the others were all killed by Hong Ye's ultimate rulers. A moment later, only ruler Hong Yi and Commander Mountain Shaker remained beside the investiture of the gods. Hoo. A gust of cold disaster blew past, ruffling the battle robes of the rulers on both sides. Commander Mountain Shaker's face darkened. Just as he was about to start the battle, Hong Yi waved his hand and interrupted him with a faint smile. Mountain Shaker, our two sides just experienced a big battle. It's quite boring to continue fighting like this. Why don't we change the way we play? Change the way you play? Commander Mountain Shaker frowned and said, "What kind of game?" Hong Yi laughed. "Apart from you and me, we'll each send out 3 ruler experts. Let them fight one-on-one. We'll win 2 out of 3. How about it?" When Commander Mountain Shaker heard this, a thoughtful look flashed across his eyes. He agreed with Hong Ye's suggestion. Firstly, this could prevent more casualties. Secondly, if they lost in a one-on-one battle, he believed that they would not win even if they went to war. Against Hong Yi, he did not have the confidence to win. After thinking for a moment, Commander Mountain Shaker nodded and said, "Sure." When Hong Yi saw this, a smile appeared on her face. She said, "Mountain Shaker, let's each prepare for the time it takes an incense stick to burn. We'll select 3 rulers from our subordinates and then we'll begin. What do you think?" Naturally, Commander Mountain Shaker had no objections. After nodding, he turned to look at the ruler under him. "Which one of you is willing to fight?" said the Mountain Shaker commander in a low voice as he swept his gaze across the rulers under his command. "We're waiting." "I'm willing to fight." "Yes." Ruler Grotto Profound and the others agreed. Jian Wushuang was also among them. When Commander Mountain Shaker saw this, a gratified look flashed in his eyes. He swept his gaze across the rulers under him, then fixed it on Ruler Grotto Profound. "How about you go first?" "I feel honored." Ruler Grotto Profound cupped his hands. Commander Mountain Shaker nodded. He looked at the square-faced, heavy-browed ruler who was holding a spear. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Ruler Earth Fury, why don't you go for the second round?" The ruler Earth Fury nodded and stepped out of the crowd. He said in a deep voice, "Don't worry, Commander. We'll do our best." Good. Commander Mountain Shaker nodded in satisfaction. Then he began to select the third candidate. He glanced at the rulers under his command and finally fixed his eyes on Jian Wushuang. Just as Jian Wushuang thought that Commander Mountain Shaker would choose him to fight, he hesitated and said, "The third candidate is still to be determined. Anyway, it's best of 3. Maybe there's no need for a third round and the battle will be decided." Jian Wushuang nodded. Since Commander Mountain Shaker did not need him to fight for the time being, he naturally would not force himself to fight. The time it takes for an incense stick to burn passed by quickly. Commander Mountain Shaker turned around and looked at Hong Yi. He said in a clear voice, "Hong Yi, we have decided on the candidates." Hearing this, Hong Yi nodded and extended a finger. "Mountain Shaker, I've already decided on the candidate. We'll only send 1 person," he said with a smile that was not a smile. "A person? Are you serious?" Commander Mountain Shaker's face instantly sank, while a hint of anger flashed across the faces of Ruler Grotto Profound and the others. Did Hong Yi think that he could take on 3 of them by himself? Hearing this, Hong Yi smiled and replied with his hands behind his back, "Of course. As long as the 3 of you can defeat him, I will admit defeat. Song Feng, come out." A plain-looking middle-aged man wearing plain clothes and wielding a blue sword walked out from behind Hong Yi. "Who is this person?" Ruler Grotto Profound and the others all frowned and looked at each other. The latter 8 cities were neither small nor big. They had all heard of the rulers who were famous and had superior strength. They had never seen this ruler called Song Feng before. Commander Mountain Shaker looked at the middle-aged man called Song Feng. For some reason, he had a bad feeling in his heart. "Dong Xian, be careful," he warned Ruler Grotto Profound. Ruler Grotto Profound nodded with a solemn expression. Since this person had been entrusted with the important task of fighting against 3 by Hong Yi, he naturally proved that his strength was extraordinary. Commander Hong Yi and Commander Mountain Shaker's forces both retreated, leaving enough space for the rulers of the two sides to fight. Song Feng walked to the center of the room, casting a cold glance at the ruler Grotto Profound and the others. All of you, come at me together. Like a stone stirring up 1,000 waves. The ruler Grotto Profound and the others were all enraged. You're so arrogant. Ruler Grotto Profound let out an angry laugh as he flew out and shot toward Song Feng. Secret skill, Thunder Slash. Boom! Lightning snakes coiled around the sphere, and it gathered on Ruler Grotto Profound's turtle-dove saber with a terrifying momentum. From the very start, Ruler Grotto Profound had directly used his most powerful technique. Die! Die! Ruler Grotto Profound bellowed, and the lightning balls on his saber began to roll down toward Song Feng. Boom! 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 Thunderbolts exploded, filling the entire hall with white light. Song Feng slowly raised his head and glanced at the Ruler Grotto Profound. You're just like clay chickens and pottery dogs. Clang! Following a loud sword cry, Song Feng's blue sword was unsheathed. A dark blue sword light instantly slashed out like a waterfall. It was extremely stunning and extremely fast. This sword light was like a white dragon emerging from the ocean. With a crisp sword cry, it ruthlessly hacked at Ruler Grotto Profound. Before the sword light touched the see-through, the sharp sword chi had already annihilated the exploding thunderbolts. Ruler Grotto Profound's face instantly changed. Ruler Grotto Profound's body trembled as he took a step forward, planning to retreat and put some distance between them. However, there's no chance. Song Feng shook his head. As soon as he finished speaking, the sword light completely blasted away the lightning. Other than the sword light dimming a little, it continued to shoot toward Ruler Grotto Profound. Clang! In an instant, the sword light viciously stabbed into Ruler Grotto Profound's chest, piercing through his divine body. With a muffled sound, Ruler Grotto Profound's entire body was like a torn sack. He streaked through the air in an arc and fell into the distance. Die! Ruler Grotto Profound's body was obliterated by large amounts of divine power, and his face was deathly pale. This sword had almost taken his life. Dong Xian! What? Ruler Mountain Shaker was startled, and he immediately rushed over to Ruler Grotto Profound's side and helped him up. He poured all of his divine power into his divine body, helping him erase the sword chi. Under the divine power of Commander Mountain Shaker, the Ruler Grotto Profound's injuries gradually recovered. His pale face also became better, but it was still a sallow color. Lord Commander, I'm sorry. I lost in my first battle and let you down. Ruler Grotto Profound forced himself to sit up and spoke with some difficulty. Shut up. Take care of your body. I'm waiting for you to kill with me in the future. As for defeat, it's not your problem. The Mountain Shaker commander interrupted him. He took a deep breath and looked at Song Feng with fear. Then, he turned to Hong Yi and said, Hong Yi, you're really good at scheming. This Song Feng probably already has an unrivaled commander-level battle prowess. Right? Hearing this, Hong Yi smiled faintly and replied, Mountain Shaker, you don't need to care about his fighting strength. As long as he's a ruler under me, he's in line with the rules. Do you understand? Commander Mountain Shaker snorted heavily upon hearing this. He knew that there was no way to refute Hong Ye's words. As long as Song Feng was one of Hong Ye's subordinates, there was nothing he could do, even if he was an invincible ruler. Taking a deep breath, the commander continued in a deep voice, Hong Yi, we admit defeat. You can take the God's Sealing Tablet. After he finished speaking, Commander Mountain Shaker planned to lead his team and leave. He knew that the ultimate rulers under him were no match for Song Feng. Even if they did, they would only be throwing their lives away. In that case, the outcome would be the same, so he might as well hand over the God's Sealing Tablet. Although Commander Mountain Shaker was unwilling, he could only lower his head in the face of circumstances. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to leave with Commander Mountain Shaker, Hong Yi suddenly said, Hold on. What? Commander Mountain Shaker stopped in his tracks. He turned around and looked at Hong Yi. His expression was not very good as he said, Hong Yi, we have already admitted defeat. What else do you want? Hong Yi put on a fake smile. Mountain Shaker, our rule is 3 rounds of competition. How can you leave before the competition is over? I, Pingsheng, hate those who don't follow the rules the most. Hong Yi continued after a pause. After he finished speaking, the ultimate rulers behind him all surged with divine power and vaguely pulled apart the formation. It was as if they would attack if Commander Mountain Shaker dared to take another step. Hong Yi, you've gone too far. Commander Mountain Shaker glared at Hong Yi. His eyes were extremely cold. Hong Yi looked down at Commander Mountain Shaker from above and said with a playful smile, Mountain Shaker, I'm already giving you a chance. Otherwise, if we really started fighting, do you think we could leave this place alive? Commander Mountain Shaker took a deep breath and pondered for a moment. He then slowly said, All right, then let's continue. After saying that, he looked at the ruler Earth Fury, who had a grave expression on his face, and said, Earth Fury, when you fight Song Feng, just admit defeat and save your life. The ruler Earth Fury nodded and replied solemnly. All right, he said. He was not a brainless brute. He could naturally tell that Song Feng's power had already reached the commander level of an invincible ruler. He was no match for him at all. Then let's start. Hong Yi smiled and waved his hand. Instantly, the battle started again. The ruler Earth Fury walked toward the empty space in the middle with heavy steps. Song Feng, who had his eyes closed and was hugging his sword, slowly opened his eyes upon hearing this. He looked at the ruler Earth Fury and said, You won't have the same luck as that person just now. Ruler Earth Fury frowned, not understanding what he meant. However, he did not plan to think too much about it. He followed the instructions of Commander Mountain Shaker and said, Song Feng, I admit defeat for this battle. However, before he could finish his sentence, You want to admit defeat? Song Feng sneered coldly as he pulled out the blue divine sword. With a single step, he transformed into a sword radiance and lunged forward. You'll have to ask the sword in my hand if it agrees. Boom! Die! Song Feng's speed was extremely fast, and he immediately flew over on his sword. He transformed into a shocking swordlight, and blue sword chi slashed out in all directions as he slashed toward the ruler Earth Fury. You! Ruler Earth Fury's expression changed. He had already admitted defeat, but Song Feng still refused to let him go. Hong Yi, what do you mean by this? Seeing this, Commander Mountain Shaker also flew into a rage and glared at Hong Yi. As for Hong Yi, he only smiled and did not respond. Secret technique, Starfall. Ruler Earth Fury let out an angry roar as the spear in his hand flashed with a cold light and stabbed toward Song Feng. Clang! The tip of Ruler Earth Fury's spear collided with Song Feng's sword light. Starting from the tip, the spear began to crack. The difference in strength between the two of them was too great. After the spear shattered, Song Feng laughed coldly as the ruler Earth Fury watched in horror. The blue divine sword in his hand slashed down once more, directly splitting the ruler Earth Fury in half. No! Arg! Ruler Earth Fury let out a miserable scream. However, Song Feng did not show any mercy at all. The sharp sword chi exploded once again, directly killing the ruler Earth Fury's divine body that had been split in half. When Commander Mountain Shaker saw this, he was so angry that his eyes were about to burst. A wave of anger rushed to his head. As for Song Feng, he kept his sword and the cold smile on his face disappeared. Song Feng, my ruler has already admitted defeat. Why do you still want to take his life? The Mountain Shaker commander glared at Song Feng and panted heavily in anger. Song Feng looked at him indifferently and replied, He's not strong enough, he can't blame me. What a good! Not strong enough. Commander Mountain Shaker laughed in anger. The veins on his forehead twisted as he said, Song Feng, what sort of skill do you have to bully a ruler under my command? If you have the guts, come fight me. Whether we live or die will depend on our own strength. How about it? Hearing this, Song Feng's eyes narrowed as he stared at the Mountain Shaker commander. He sneered, Why wouldn't I? Before he could finish his sentence, Hong Yi waved his hand with a smile and said, "All right, I'm done." Zhang Feng, Mountain Shaker, is an old-school Omega ruler who has lived through multiple chaos cycles. He's not someone you can fight against. As soon as he finished speaking, Hong Yi turned to look at Commander Mountain Shaker and continued, "Mountain Shaker, hurry up and send out the third candidate." It was obvious that Hong Yi had already won this competition. Commander Mountain Shaker's face was extremely gloomy. He understood that if they wanted to leave this place alive, they could only follow Hong Ye's rules. Taking a deep breath, Commander Mountain Shaker turned his head and looked at the ultimate ruler under him. Under his gaze, everyone could not help but shrink their heads and take a few steps back. Zhang Feng had won 2 battles, while Ruler Grotto Profound and Ruler Earthfury had lost one to another. His might was simply too great, and they had long since been scared out of their wits. "Who is willing to fight?" Commander Mountain Shaker asked in a deep voice. The many ultimate rulers in the crowd looked at each other in silence, as quiet as cicadas in winter. It was true that they were working for the Overlord, but that did not mean that they would still go up even if they knew that they would die. Commander Mountain Shaker's heart sank when he saw this. He could not help but laugh bitterly, but he did not blame them. "Zhang Feng, as you can see, none of the rulers under my command dare to accept my challenge." Commander Mountain Shaker took a deep breath, turned his head and said mockingly, "Oh!" Zhang Feng's brows twitched as his lips curled into a mocking smile. "Are the Overlord's subordinates all such a bunch of cowards?" Shaking his head in boredom, Zhang Feng narrowed his eyes and glanced at the faces of the many ultimate rulers behind Commander Mountain Shaker. "If that's the case, then I'll choose my own partner." Faced with Zhang Feng's gaze, the hearts of the many ultimate rulers turned cold. They could not help but take half a step back, as if they were afraid of being picked. Seeing this, the mockery in Zhang Feng's eyes grew. At this moment, his gaze stopped on the face of a black-robed, black-haired, cold-looking young man. Under his gaze, everyone unconsciously took a step back. Only this person remained standing there indifferently, his face expressionless. No one could tell whether he was happy or sad. "Who are you?" Zhang Feng asked with interest. "Blood Sword." Jian Wushuang glanced at him and replied indifferently. "Why didn't you retreat when you saw me?" Zhang Feng continued to ask. "Why should I retreat?" Jian Wushuang's expression was neither happy nor sad as he asked. "Ha ha ha ha. Interesting." When Zhang Feng heard this, it was as if he had just heard a joke. He twisted his neck and said, "Blood Sword, it's you. You are the candidate for the third battle." As soon as he finished speaking, the ultimate rulers behind Commander Mountain Shaker trembled and looked at Jian Wushuang with sympathy. "Blood Sword, you've done enough to defeat Cold Disaster," said Commander Mountain Shaker. "You don't have to fight." Jian Wushuang smiled and said, "It's fine." When the Mountain Shaker commander heard this, he was about to say something when Zhang Feng provoked him. "Blood Sword, I see that you're holding a sword. You must be a sword cultivator, right? We sword cultivators press forward with indomitable will and have no fear in our hearts. What can you achieve by dawdling?" Jian Wushuang laughed and looked at Zhang Feng. "Do you really want to fight me that much?" Hearing this, Zhang Feng laughed in disdain. "Blood Sword, hurry up and attack. If I'm in a good mood, I might even give you a few pointers on the way of the sword." Pausing for a moment, Zhang Feng seemed to have thought of something and added, "Blood Sword, you're also a sword cultivator, so you should know the origin of the way of the sword, right? Let me remind you that my comprehension of the origin of the way of the sword has already reached the 3rd stage. Give me some pointers? 3rd level essence of the Tao of the sword." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help but feel speechless. Then he shook his head and sighed. "As you wish, then." Jian Wushuang took a step forward. When Commander Mountain Shaker saw this, he knew that there was no way to change it. He could only helplessly warn, "Blood Sword, Zhang Feng is much stronger than Cold Disaster. You must not force yourself. Once you realize that you are no match for Zhang Feng, I will admit defeat immediately. As long as you admit defeat, I will protect you." Jian Wushuang nodded to show that he understood. Looking at Jian Wushuang, Song Feng's lips curled up and he asked, "Blood sword? Are you ready?" Jian Wushuang did not answer but said calmly, "Song Feng, I'll only use 3 strikes. If you can take all 3, I'll admit defeat." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone was stunned and looked at Jian Wushuang in disbelief. They wondered if they had heard wrong. Even Hong Yi, who was smiling triumphantly, was stunned. This kid, did he know what he was saying? Arrogant. Song Feng laughed in anger. Without any hesitation, he stomped his foot and shot into the sky. Secret skill, sword flower water moon. Boom! An extremely sharp sword light slashed out from Song Feng's blue sword. A terrifying sword intent spread out in all directions, and everyone's hearts shivered as cold sweat appeared on their foreheads. The next moment, Song Feng laughed coldly as he swung his sword at Jian Wushuang. Go to hell! Jian Wushuang's black hair was loose and his expression was calm. He spat out 3 words. The first strike. Chi. With a soft sound, Jian Wushuang casually struck out a crimson sword light. It was a simple stroke without any power, but it seemed natural and flawless, as if swordsmanship was supposed to be like this. The blood-red sword radiance quickly met the sharp sword radiance in Song Feng's hand. However, such an ordinary sword strike was like breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. It instantly reduced Song Feng's gaudy sword radiance to dust, like an egg hitting a stone. The sword light could not stop Jian Wushuang's sword at all and broke into pieces. How is this possible? Song Feng's pupils contracted as he exclaimed. Bang! The blood-red sword projection landed on Song Feng's body, directly cleaving him down from the sky. The sword projection drew an arc in the air before crashing heavily into the ground, creating a huge crater. Dust and dirt filled the air as Song Feng's hair and face became disheveled. He could no longer maintain his calm, his face filled with fear. A few hair-like cracks appeared on the blue divine sword in his hand. How could this be? How could this be? He knelt on the ground and raised his head to look at Jian Wushuang. His eyes were full of fear and disbelief. He was an almighty expert of the Tao of the sword who was close to the level of an invincible ruler. Nothing is impossible. The impossible doesn't just come from your ignorance. Jian Wushuang shook his head and spoke again with a calm expression. The second strike. The second strike. Split open the sky. As soon as Jian Wushuang finished speaking, the Wuxia divine sword in his hand trembled thousands of times. A sword light gradually condensed and then, like a rolling river, it crushed toward Song Feng with a muffled boom. In the beginning, the sword was only as thick as a strand of hair. As the sword chi condensed, it gradually became as thick as an arm. When the sword really crossed the sky, it was as if the sky river was hanging upside down, and the sun and moon were connected. It was extremely amazing, the brilliant might of the heavens, guided by the sword. At this moment, everyone raised their heads to look at the sword, their expressions horrified. Godly swordsmanship. This is a true sword cultivator. Who is this person? Why wasn't he famous before? This sword instantly caught everyone's attention. Even Hong Yi and Commander Mountain Shaker had a flash of surprise in their eyes. This is the aura of 4th-level sword principle. Song Feng's breathing quickened as he stared at the heaven-opening sword ray. His eyes were filled with horror as if he had seen a ghost. Only those who were also sword cultivators could understand the horror of this sword. He could clearly feel that Jian Wushuang's heaven-opening sword light had far surpassed his comprehension of sword principle. It was the aura of a 4th-level sword principle. Even a supreme martial artist might not be able to deduce his own Tao to the 4th level. I'm not his match. I have to run. Song Feng's mind whirred as he made up his mind. He took a step forward and was about to escape. However, before he could rise from the pit, bang! The heaven-opening sword ray descended. Get lost! Song Feng roared as he raised the blue divine sword above his head to block the heaven-splitting sword radiance. Chi chi chi. Countless sparks flew as Song Feng's clothes were torn apart, revealing his muscular body. All the divine power in his body surged and poured into the blue divine sword in an attempt to block the sky-opening sword radiance. However, no matter if it was the strength of Jian Wushuang's divine power, his comprehension of the sword principle, or the grade of the Wuxia divine sword, Jian Wushuang was far superior to him. How could he block it? In the face of absolute strength, all resistance would not be able to withstand a single blow. Kacha! Kacha! Cracks began to appear on the blue divine sword. The crack began to spread rapidly. Break! Song Feng gritted his teeth and roared. Cha-cha-cha! More and more cracks appeared. In the next moment, the blue divine sword was completely shattered into countless pieces. The heaven-opening sword ray landed on Song Feng's shoulder. Bang! Song Feng was forced back into the crater by the heaven-opening sword radiance. It was as if there was a huge force that wanted to press him under the five-finger mountain. Ka-ka-ka. His legs could not withstand the huge force from the sky-opening sword ray, and his knees gradually bent. Bang! Following a loud explosion, Song Feng knelt on the ground, his knees creating two craters in the ground. The sky-opening sword ray was still on his shoulder, pressing down. The sharp sword essence kept exploding in his body. After a while, the heaven-opening sword light finally dissipated. Song Feng kneeled on the ground. His aura was extremely weak. His divine power was like a lamp without oil. He was clearly on the verge of death. With one sword, the blue shattered and Song Feng knelt. When countless people saw this scene, they felt a chill run down their spines to their heads, as if they had fallen into an ice cellar. They turned their heads stiffly and looked at Jian Wushuang in shock. The disbelief in their eyes turned into shock. Even Commander Mountain Shaker's mouth was wide open, and his eyes were wide open. Ruler Grotto Profound stood there in a daze, even forgetting that he had been heavily injured. At that moment, Jian Wushuang was like the sun in the sky, and everyone looked up to him. Jian Wushuang's expression was calm and emotionless. It was as if he had just done something insignificant to him. He looked at Song Feng and said indifferently, "The third strike." With that, Song Feng's eyes flashed with a look of fear as he looked at Hong Yi for help. He raised his head with great difficulty and said weakly, Hong Yi, save me." Hong Ye's eyes flickered as she stepped in front of Song Feng and extended her hand. "Stop! We admit defeat in this battle, and you can take this God-sealing tablet." As soon as he finished speaking, a touch of joy flashed in the eyes of Mountain Shaker and the others. They quickly turned to look at Jian Wushuang and said, "Blood sword, it's done." However, Jian Wushuang seemed to ignore it and said indifferently, "I said 3 swords, and I mean 3 swords. No one can block it. The third sword, sundering stars." Whoosh! In an instant, time seemed to have stopped. The surging wind, floating clouds, and floating dust in the void all turned into the purest energy, shooting from all directions like 100 rivers flowing back. Finally, they all gathered in Jian Wushuang's hand and turned into a silver sword rainbow that was 1,000 feet long. Jian Wushuang spread his fingers and held the sword rainbow. There seemed to be an invisible force between heaven and earth that lifted him up. At this moment, he no longer concealed his aura. A sharp sword essence shot up into the sky as if it was going to shatter the chaos and split the world. Jian Wushuang was like the sword god Ling Chun. Slash! Jian Wushuang said coldly. In an instant, the 1,000-foot sword rainbow slashed down. This sword was vast and mighty, directly splitting the sky nearly 10,000 feet apart. Hong Ye's expression changed drastically. Even he felt a sense of powerlessness in the face of this sword. A sense of threat that was like a piercing light enveloped him. For the first time, apart from facing a powerful being, Hong Yi felt like he was about to die. This person, I can't block it. Hong Yi took a deep breath, and a serious look appeared in his eyes. He then turned to Song Feng and shook his head. "Song Feng, you're on your own." After saying that, Hong Yi actually took a step and fled. "No!" Seeing this, Song Feng let out a howl of despair. Bang! The Sundering Stars sword finally slashed down. Under this sword, it was as if the heavens were angry and doomsday disasters were coming. The earth began to crack and split, and bottomless chasms appeared. The violent sword chi swept in all directions, setting off a storm that razed everything to the ground. Everyone's expression changed drastically, and they retreated thousands of feet. The might of a single sword is so terrifying. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air and thought of the same thing. In the middle of the storm, Jian Wushuang had put away the Wuxia divine sword in his interspatial ring. The storm gradually dissipated, only to see that the 1,000-foot area where the seal was hidden was in ruins. There was no trace of Zongfeng's life there. Under this sword, Zongfeng's body and soul were completely destroyed. He could not be more dead. Hoo. Gusts of wind gradually blew away the smoke and dust. Everyone who saw this scene trembled all over, and their hair stood on end. No one spoke. Everyone was still immersed in Jian Wushuang's amazing sword. The scene turned into a dead silence. This sword attack had far surpassed their knowledge and understanding of the sword doctrine. This sword strike was comparable to an invincible ruler's. Under the might of the sword, Hong Yi fled while Zongfeng perished. How can this person be so powerful? Zongfeng is a ruler who's almost at the invincible level. 3 sword strikes. This person really only used 3 sword moves. And these 3 swords killed Zongfeng. This person is the Overlord's subordinate. It's the Overlord's blessing. He killed the cold disaster, retreated the red leaves, and destroyed the hidden seal. This person is invincible. Countless people trembled as they discussed. However, the discussion was a little different. The ruler who belonged to the 9 Stars Holy Land camp was chattering his teeth. His voice was filled with fear, and his face was ashen. They looked at Jian Wushuang in shock and trembled. They did not dare to move, for fear that Jian Wushuang would kill them all with another stroke if he was unhappy. They believed that if Jian Wushuang wanted to kill them, it would not be more difficult than killing Zongfeng. Although the Overlord's subordinate, the Creator, was shocked, he was also rejoicing. Good. This blood sword is from our side. Otherwise, who could stop him? With this blood sword, who will I be afraid of in the future? Ruler Grotto Profound's mouth was wide open, and a sense of absurdity welled up in his heart. It was this person. He actually said that he would give him some pointers? Tell him to hide behind his back and not provoke others? Looking at Jian Wushuang, Ruler Grotto Profound's face turned red, and he wanted to find a hole to hide in. The blood sword. Even Commander Mountain Shaker swallowed his saliva. Under this sword, even he could not guarantee in his heart whether he, who had astonishing defensive power, had the confidence to take this Sundering Star's sword. At the center of the storm, Jian Wushuang stood in the void with his hands behind his back. His eyes were bright and his jet-black hair was loose on his shoulders. The breeze gently blew his loose black robe. He was so ordinary, but at this moment he was as dazzling as the stars in the sky. Countless gazes gathered. It was as if even billions of starlights were inferior to him. I want the God Sealing Tablet. Do you have any objections? Jian Wushuang lowered his head and looked down at the remaining ultimate rulers of the 9 Stars Holy Land. I don't dare. The remaining ultimate rulers immediately waved their hands, not daring to look into Jian Wushuang's eyes. Good. Jian Wushuang smiled and walked down from the sky into the crowd of Overlord's subordinates. Blood sword. You really bring me one surprise after another, said Commander Mountain Shaker with a bitter smile. In this world, the strong were respected, and the current Jian Wushuang was on equal footing with him or even higher than him. I was just lucky, Jian Wushuang said with a smile. Commander Mountain Shaker laughed bitterly and said no more. Good luck. Do you think I'm stupid? Taking a deep breath, the commander turned to the remaining ultimate ruler of the 9 Stars Holy Land and said in a deep voice, I'll give you 2 choices now. The first is that you will all die here for the 9 Stars Holy Land. The second is to forsake the dark and join the light, and join us, the Overlord. The remaining ultimate rulers of the 9 Stars Holy Land were all overjoyed. As long as they did not exterminate them, they could do whatever they wanted. We are willing to serve the Overlord. Yes. The remaining ultimate rulers of the 9 Stars Holy Land immediately cupped their hands in respect. Seeing this, Commander Mountain Shaker nodded in satisfaction and said, "In that case, follow me to see the Overlord." A moment later, Commander Mountain Shaker put away the investiture of the gods, and the group of people swept toward the 12th city. The Overlord was in the 11th city. After returning to the first city, Commander Mountain Shaker first made arrangements for the ultimate rulers of the 9 Stars Holy Land. Then he looked for Jian Wushuang. "Blood Sword, I've told the Overlord about you. He's very curious about you now, so he sent me to invite you to his palace to reward you," said Commander Mountain Shaker with a smile. Jian Wushuang nodded and said, "Then I'll have to trouble Commander Mountain Shaker to lead the way." "It's no trouble at all. It's what I should do." Commander Mountain Shaker waved his hand with a smile and led Jian Wushuang to a group of palaces. This group of palaces was extremely magnificent and huge. There were no less than 1,000 ordinary palaces. In the center of the palace there was an extremely towering hall. The hall was made of divine crystals and white jade, and the words "Conqueror's Divine Palace" were engraved on the card in gold. The strokes were vast and bold, and it was full of a sense of majesty. The two of them quickly arrived outside the hall. "Greetings, Commander Mountain Shaker." "Yes." The two ultimate rulers in charge of guarding the palace cupped their hands. Commander Mountain Shaker nodded in response. He then looked at Jian Wushuang and said, "Blood Sword, I'll go in and report first. You wait here for a while." "Go." Jian Wushuang replied with a calm expression. Commander Mountain Shaker no longer hesitated. He strode into the Overlord's divine palace. After about the time it took for an incense stick to burn, a long cry came from inside. "Lord Blood Sword, the Overlord has invited you." Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed and he immediately stepped into the Overlord Divine Palace. The Overlord's building was extremely spacious and grand. It was supported by 4 pillars that reached to the sky, and golden dragons coiled around it. Jian Wushuang looked up and saw a golden dragon throne made of top divine materials in the center of the hall. There were 6 big chairs under it, and 6 people were sitting on the wooden chairs in a row. Commander Mountain Shaker was sitting in the second seat on the left. Jian Wushuang glanced at the 6 people. Their cultivation was almost at the invincible level of rulers. These 6 people must be the 6 great commanders under the Overlord. Jian Wushuang's eyes did not stay on the 6 people for long. He looked at the dragon throne in the center of the hall. There, an extremely burly giant with twisted muscles was sitting on the dragon throne. This person's skin was covered in mysterious golden runes. He had a square face and heavy brows. His eyes were bright and filled with a sense of power without being angry. With just a glance, one could not help but feel fear. This person was one of the 9 magnates in the depths of the ancient path of stars. He possessed the undying tyrant body, the Overlord. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes slightly. This person's qi and blood were extremely strong. Even from such a distance, Jian Wushuang could feel the violent power contained in this person's body. When Jian Wushuang looked at the man also looked at Jian Wushuang. "You are the Blood Sword?" the Overlord said in a low voice. "Blood Sword greets the Overlord." Jian Wushuang collected his thoughts, cupped his hands and replied in a neither humble nor overbearing manner. In the Overlord's divine palace, the 6 commanders sat in a row and looked at Jian Wushuang curiously. They wanted to see what was so special about this newcomer who could kill an almost invincible ruler and force Hong Yi to retreat with 3 moves. However, they were disappointed. Jian Wushuang's aura was ordinary. They could not tell how strong or weak he was. It was as if he was just an ordinary person among the masses. Jian Wushuang's expression was calm and his heart was calm. He was just speculating about the Overlord's strength. The Overlord's blood qi was as dazzling as the sun, and no one dared to look directly at him. Most likely, cultivators who were close to the level of invincible rulers would not even have the right to get close to him. Is this the strength of a big shot? Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed. The great conqueror's strength was definitely one of the strongest among the unparalleled rulers. He was much stronger than Lord Jinan, the 3rd prince, and the others who had been in the Taro ruins. Could be said that among all the ultimate rulers that Jian Wushuang had met, This person could be called the strongest, except for the ninth Kulpa King. Even when facing the ninth Kulpa King, who was at the ultimate ruler realm, this person's strength was only a little weaker. Blood sword. There's no need to be so polite with this king, the overlord said indifferently. Jian Wushuang collected his thoughts and nodded. Blood sword, according to Mountain Shaker, you have contributed a lot to his success in obtaining the deification tablet. If you didn't kill Cold Disaster and Song Feng and force Hong Yi to retreat, the deification tablet would have fallen into his hands. The overlord continued. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang smiled and said humbly, Overlord, you must be joking. I only did a little bit of my power. It wasn't enough to affect the overall situation. Oh? Blood sword, you're a strange person. Other people are trying to take the credit for themselves, but you're acting as if you're afraid of being rewarded. The overlord was a little dumbfounded. Usually, when he met the rulers under his command, almost all of them would try their best to show off their abilities in front of him, bragging about how strong they were. No matter how big or small the credit was, they would try their best to take it on themselves, just hoping that he would look at them with respect. As for Jian Wushuang in front of him, from the moment he entered the sect, not only did he not show any excitement on his face after seeing him, but even when he took the initiative to praise him, Jian Wushuang's expression was calm from beginning to end, without the slightest bit of complacency. The overlord could not help but think highly of Jian Wushuang. To remain calm even when flattered or insulted, to remain calm even when Mount Tai collapses in front of you, this was the appearance of a great person. The overlord looked at Jian Wushuang again. Just as he was about to say something, the words that were on the tip of his tongue suddenly stopped. As if he had discovered something incredible, his expression changed slightly. Then, he looked at Jian Wushuang with a 3-inch golden light in his eyes. The next moment, the overlord retracted the golden light in his eyes and said in a deep voice, Bloodsword, if I'm not wrong, you're only a 5th stage ruler, right? As soon as he finished speaking, the entire hall was shocked. What? A 5th stage chief ruler? Impossible! A 5th stage chief ruler killing an almost invincible chief ruler? That's completely impossible. A 5th stage great emperor killing an almost invincible ruler is unprecedented. I've never heard of it. I've never heard of a 5th stage great ruler killing an almost invincible great ruler. Even the supreme existences who rule the universe today might not be able to do it when they were 5th stage great rulers. I think the overlord must have seen wrong. Yes, that must be it. The expressions of the 6 commanders were all very serious. Even Commander Mountain Shaker was shaking his head in disbelief. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. He had not expected that the overlord would see through his hidden cultivation. After pondering for a while, Jian Wushuang decided not to hide it anymore. He nodded and replied, Yes. As soon as he finished speaking, an aura belonging to a 5th stage ruler immediately spread out from Jian Wushuang's body. Feeling this aura, the 6 commanders felt as if they had been struck by lightning, and their bodies trembled violently. It really is a 5th stage great ruler. As a 5th stage ruler, he killed an almost invincible ruler with 3 sword strikes. How could there be such a monstrous person in this world? This is crazy. In an instant, the entire Conqueror's divine palace was in an uproar. The 6 commanders were all dumbfounded, their eyes almost popping out of their sockets. Even the overlord had a look of bewilderment in his eyes after getting Jian Wushuang's confirmation. He really is a ruler of the 5th level, the overlord exclaimed in surprise. Jian Wushuang killing Song Feng with 3 moves was already terrifying enough. Jian Wushuang was only a stage 5 great emperor. What kind of concept was that? Everyone knew that there was a huge gap between the 5th level and the ultimate ruler's sword. Once a 5th stage ruler became an ultimate ruler, 9 laws would merge, and his strength would increase by leaps and bounds. Jian Wushuang was only a 5th level ruler, but he could easily kill you, who was almost invincible. What would happen when he advanced to the ultimate ruler? Instantly, the 6 commanders felt a chill all over their bodies, and they did not dare to think further. The overlord took a deep breath and his expression gradually became calm. He was one of the strongest rulers in the entire universe. Although he was shocked that Jian Wushuang, a ruler of the 5th level, had killed a ruler of an almost invincible level, it was not to the extent that he could not speak. Blood sword. It's my blessing that you're under my command. The conqueror smiled and continued, Blood sword. The fact that you were able to kill Song Feng means that your battle power is close to that of an unparalleled ruler. In the last 8 cities, people who are close to the unparalleled ruler level of battle power are referred to as commander-level battle power, and those who possess this level of battle power are often given the position of commander level in any faction. This king's subordinates are naturally the same. I wonder if you are willing to become the 7th commander under me? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang thought for a moment and then nodded with a smile. Thank you for your appreciation for the blood sword, Overlord. Ha ha ha. Don't ever say the word love again. It's nothing more than you and this king having the same goal, so we can win together. The Overlord laughed and got up from his dragon throne. He looked out of the hall and said in a deep voice, Men, pass down this king's orders. From today onwards, I will grant Blood Sword the position of commander. Feng Blood Sword will be the 7th commander under me. Yes. Suddenly, a long cry came from outside the door. A god armor guard set up a black gold chair and placed it beside the 6 commanders. After Jian Wushuang took his seat, the Overlord spoke again in a deep voice. I'll also bestow Blood Sword with 10 million universe origin stones, 100 godly medicines, and 3 top-tier law cardinal treasures. Yes, a long voice came from outside again. A god armor guard respectfully walked over with a jade plate in his hands. On the jade plate was a black cosmos ring. The interspatial ring represented Jian Wushuang's status as a commander of a region. The 10 million universe origin stones and 100 divine medicines that he had given to the universe were all in it. Even Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows slightly and was surprised by such a grand gesture. And this was not the end. The Overlord's voice was heard again. 3 blood swords and 1 piece of the investiture of the gods. 3 blood swords and 1 piece of the investiture of the gods. As soon as he finished speaking, the Overlord waved his hand and a square stone tablet suddenly appeared in his hand. The stone tablet expanded in the wind and soon, it was like a small mound, sitting in the center of the hall. Jian Wushuang looked at it carefully and saw that the stone tablet was dark and the words Investiture of the Gods were written on it. Commander Bloodsword, please accept this god's sealing tablet. The Overlord laughed heartily. All right, he said. Jian Wushuang did not refuse and put the investiture of the gods into his interspatial ring. We congratulate Commander Bloodsword. In the future, the 7 of us will have to take care of each other and work together. When the 6 commanders saw this, they congratulated him. Of course, Jian Wushuang replied with a smile. The Overlord saw this scene and could not help but nod to himself. He then said to the 6 commanders, Buxu, Mountain Shaker, Cold Disaster. The 6 of you will each select 10 Omega rulers from your subordinates and hand them over to Commander Bloodsword. Yes, the 6 commanders quickly acknowledged. After that, the Overlord gave some more instructions and ordered them to retreat. After Jian Wushuang and the other 7 commanders left, the Overlord Divine Palace fell into silence. The smile on the Overlord's face gradually disappeared. He looked at the empty hall and said indifferently, Fei Ying, what do you think of this blood sword? As soon as he finished speaking, a thin black shadow walked out from behind the Overlord. His entire body was covered in a black robe, making it impossible to see his appearance. He knelt down on one knee and replied in a hoarse voice, Lord Overlord, I can't tell how powerful this blood sword is, but I can roughly estimate that it's probably already at the threshold of an unparalleled ruler. The threshold to becoming an invincible ruler. Ha! The Overlord squinted his eyes and raised his head to look into the distance. No one knew what he was thinking, but his fingers rhythmically tapped on the armrest of the dragon throne, making a do-do-do sound. The black-robed figure continued, Lord Overlord, and I can sense that the blood sword has discovered me. The Overlord nodded and did not reply. After a long while, he slowly said, This blood sword isn't a simple person. I don't believe that someone who can kill an almost invincible ruler as a fifth-stage great ruler would remain unknown in the universe. Fei Ying, go out and investigate this blood sword for me. You must find out what kind of divine being this blood sword is. Yes. The black-clothed figure's voice sank as he planned to fly out. Wait. The overlord opened his mouth again and called out to him. His eyes flickered as he said, "Don't alarm anyone for this investigation. I have something to tell you." "What is it?" "You can speak your mind, my lord. Make a trip to the 10th city and find the person who broke through to the 8th level in the God-refining tower. If you find this person, you must lower your attitude and tell him that this king has invited him to meet." "Yes, sir." After the black-clothed figure left, the overlord sat on the dragon throne. A thoughtful look flashed through his eyes, and then he slowly closed his eyes. In just one day, Jian Wushuang's 7th governor's mansion was completed. It was built with various divine materials and looked extremely luxurious. That night, the night wind was blowing. Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged in a wing room, holding the interspatial ring that the overlord had given him today, and a playful look flashed in his eyes. Today, in the hall, the overlord seemed to be bold and generous. In fact, Jian Wushuang could feel that the overlord was obviously suspicious of him. Behind the overlord, there was a pair of cold eyes staring at him. However, Jian Wushuang did not take it to heart. After all, his appearance and rise were too sudden. If it were anyone else, Xianxia would have some thoughts. In a few more days, when the Wuxia divine sword is completely repaired, I'll leave this place. Jian Wushuang was deep in thought. He had not entered the 8 cities on the ancient path of stars to risk his life for others. Then, Jian Wushuang turned over his right hand and the Wuxia divine sword was placed in front of his knees. The Wuxia divine sword was stained with spots of poison, which were caused by the venom of the heavenly snake playboy when it dripped on the Wuxia divine sword. However, after Jian Wushuang had nourished it with divine power day and night during this period of time, more than half of the poisonous spots had been removed. There were only some marks left. It would not take long for the Wuxia divine sword to be completely repaired. Jian Wushuang flipped his right hand again and 2 poisonous fangs floated in front of him. The 2 venomous fangs were the essence of Heavenly Snake Playboy. When Heavenly Snake Playboy was killed by Jian Wushuang, only these 2 venomous fangs were left. These 2 venomous fangs can probably be refined into 3 drops of venom, and just 1 drop of venom is enough to kill a weaker, invincible ruler like Lord Jinnan. When the 3 of them are used together, even the conqueror, who has the undying overlord body, will have to retreat. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered, and he immediately began to refine the 2 venomous fangs. Time flew by, and 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. One day, while Jian Wushuang was cultivating, Commander Mountain Shaker's hearty laughter suddenly came from outside the door. "Blood Sword, the 6 of us have finished selecting the final rulers. Come out and take a look." In the wing room, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes and a light flashed in his eyes. Back then, the overlord had said that each of the 6 commanders would choose 10 ultimate rulers from their own subordinates and hand them over to Jian Wushuang. It seemed that the 6 commanders had already completed their selection and were here to send the people over. "They're here," Jian Wushuang replied indifferently. Then he took a step forward and disappeared from the room. At the same time, at the entrance of the 10th city, a black shadow condensed. Then, a hunchbacked monster with spikes on its back appeared at the entrance of the 10th city's passage. "So this is the 10th city? There doesn't seem to be anything special about it." The monster's white eyes rolled slightly as it looked up at the 10th city and clicked its tongue. This person was Qiu Long. "Hey, you dog slave. You said that the blood sword has arrived in the 10th city, right?" Beside him was a gray-haired old man who was being held by a black chain. The old man with white hair and a white beard had both his hands and feet on the ground. He looked at Qiu Long with fear in his eyes. If Jian Wushuang had been there, he would have realized that the old man was the city lord of the 9th city, a veteran ultimate ruler. "It's yes, but I don't know if the blood sword has left the 10th city and entered the last 8 cities. The 9th city's city lord said in a trembling voice. It's fine. I can take my time to look for him." Qiu Long grinned. revealing 2 rows of sharp and cold teeth.